12 miles below. By Mark Arrows. Chapter 81-90. Book 2, Chapter 34, A Major Test of Strength, T. Every single Winterscar Tarath had met in her life, she'd underestimated. And every single time it had cost her. Once this was all over, the feather swore she would hardwire an alarm. Have it blare in her system anytime she even so much as heard their name. Remind her not to let any of them slip under her skin. Do you always run in terror like this? Kedra taunted from the ground. The clan lord made it seem like your kind were opponents from myth. What a disappointment. Down to Wrath Dove, weapons out, snarling, all previous thoughts forgotten. Her dual longswords collided against Kedra's own blades, the ancient relic armor straining against the full might of a feather. Creaking backwards, just an inch, before Tarath aborted, leaping backwards, back onto solid ground. The moment she landed, Kedra was already lunging out for a counter-strike of her own, knives flashing out in a whirlwind of motion. Tarath crouched, then rocketed forward herself, meeting the charge head first. A mural of pale blue sparks manifested into the air as their blades collided again and again, fractions of seconds in between, moving faster and faster. In her stolen memories, Tennycent had never lost to his daughter. Not even once. And he had nowhere near the speed Tarath could tap into. This time Tarath was sure she had access to the well. Instinct and all. Somehow, the girl was matching both her speed and skill. How has the girl improved so much in the past few weeks? Impossible. Kedra seemed to almost sense her attacks, as if smelling a scent in the air, like a dog chasing after hiding prey. Even Tennycent's methodical and precise style of combat wasn't enough against someone who simply knew what was coming and where all the traps lay. It was too uncanny. Tarath shunted off a thread and dedicated it to hunt down answers as she kept pace. Combat subroutines confirmed it in moments, returning raw data that made little sense. From the moment Tarath planned her attack or counter, the girl seemed to predict it with 100% accuracy. No deviation. On average, between 120 milliseconds to 190, already executing the counter move before Tarath had even begun any physical motions, let alone before a possible physical tell. Kedra was in her head somehow. Something was wrong. Humans were never this consistently accurate when guessing. The girl was slowly pushing Tarath back. 4 minutes into the frantic fight, a pair of knives expertly weaved past her guard, striking her fingers and continuing across her arms, and finally breaking down her shields. A review over the combat logs showed no errors in Tarath's choice of action. Every move had been optimal. Despite that, the girl was now only a single well-placed slice away from victory. And the feather was nowhere near close to breaking the human's shields. At this rate, her subroutines predicted total defeat within the next 33 seconds, plus or minus 7 seconds. Tarath needed to be faster. Tennycent's skills weren't enough. She drew herself out of danger, but her shields had been eaten in the exchange. Kurda allowed it, letting the feather pull back far out of range, taking the moment to catch her own breath and recenter herself. She could feel that something had changed, after the feather dove down from the sky. The girl had pushed it aside in the heat of the fight, not letting the shock paralyze her from the realization that the machine fought in a way that she recognized. In a way she'd trained against for half a lifetime. "What are you? Who taught you?" She called out, the sense of shock carried through her words. "How do you know all these techniques?" "You know exactly who taught me." The feather taunted back. "No one else fights the same way." While the words sank into Kedra's mind, Tarath was busy reaching for parts of her own mind that she hadn't needed before. Down into her core, she unlocked safety parameters and overclocked her system. Increased memory read and write speeds. Increased voltage. Split a few hundred parallel threads and gave orders to each. New combat subroutines, dedicated to prediction and analytics, booted up and began to pour over the past few minutes, crunching data in a massive torrent. She connected her wings into the combat subroutines, merging the systems together. Letting the combat systems calculate faster turns, quicker lunges, and more controlled dodges for her. Time began to slow as the overclock took effect. Combat solutions and alternate movesets flowed across her senses by the dozens. Heat built up, but held within tolerance. For now. Ready, she struck forward like a spear, diving straight for her stunned opponent. Kedra's blades rose up once more to hold off her advance. The duel changed. Two combat experts, both able to predict the opponent's movements ahead of time to a high degree of certainty. They twirled and jumped around each other, aborting dozens of attacks all within seconds, each motion living only short half-lives, never fully complete. Both reacting not to what was before them, but to the ever-changing future they each predicted. Whole minutes passed without so much a single clash of blades as both tried to wrestle for range and position. The duel becoming an utterly mental struggle for superiority. Tarath didn't know what Kedra had done in order to put her in this league of skill, but she'd overwhelm the human one way or another. Her advantages were mechanical, flawless, and consistent. Kedra would falter at some point, make a mistake, predict incorrectly. She was only human after all. But somehow, Kedra kept up, despite the odds. Combat simulations within Tarath self-corrected, predicting her opponent's expected downfall, and constantly failed to get it right. Each prediction became more and more uncertain, the error deviation growing exponentially as the statistical anomaly grew. Until they could generate no meaningful answer from any known mathematical model and promptly shut down as wasted resources. Something was wrong. Tarath increased her core clock speed again and shunted more power flow. Faster. She needed to be faster. Her swings accelerated, inertia and material structure now becoming significant factors. Programs had to take into calculations the strains on her superstructure. Red warning signs appeared across her body, small microsplinters in the metallic bones caused by the rapid change of motion. Heat continued to pound away at Tarath's systems. Yellow warning messages appeared on the side of her vision, suggesting non-critical systems to be terminated and giving warning that continued overdraw was unsustainable at the current rate. Darwinian learning algorithms crunched her stolen skills, calculating hundreds of permutations, pitting them against one another, leaving only the most optimal solutions. She implemented them, and yet somehow the girl seemed to know what was coming, regardless. Tarath doubled the inflow again, moving the scale from hundreds to thousands. The trickiest moves, the most unpredictable responses, all still guessed at with 100% accuracy. It made no sense. How was this human outperforming her at full power? A data leak? Was her system being hacked, by a human? How was that even possible? She interjected her own neuromorphic mind into the combat algorithms in desperation, watching as the digital strings expanded out like origami, mutating the results. The solutions grew wild, out of touch, unhinged. Movesets became munged together. She picked the ones that felt right to her, and discarded the rest, no matter how optimal the math claimed it to be. The fight collapsed half into the physical realm again, the occasional movements now fully living into a true attack. And with horrible consequences. Tarath let parts of her body be stabbed, trading the hits on non-vital systems in exchange for her opponent's shields. She wasn't human. Physical damage wasn't an issue. Danger sailed by her again and again, the whole fight being on a knife edge from complete destruction. If she made even one wrong gamble, one wrong move for a fraction of a moment, Kedra's knives would sink into her throat and cut the life out of her. Those blades got close, but not close enough. The feather's body became riddled with cuts, exposing the metal circuitry under the false skin. Entire patches were shredded, down to the core. But what she gained in exchange was worth it. A dizzying array of strikes, plans and wing movements all blended together into a tapestry that was slowly overcoming the surface night. Ground was lost, chip damage began to accumulate. Kedra was being pushed back, finally. Her ability to predict Tarath was rapidly fading away as not even the feather knew what her next move was anymore, or if it even had a name. She was inventing things wholesale out of the ether, taking Tennysen's skills and elevating it past the theoretical limit. Movements stopped having any sense of organized style. The fight fully collapsed all at once back into a true physical one, filled again with occult sparks flashing for half-lived moments with each blade collision. 100 small flashes of pale blue light, like a swarm of fireflies flowing between both fighters, following them without fail no matter where they leaped and moved to. Tarath was somewhere else. Too much of her systems had been shut down in order to maximize her combat. News feed about her army had been cut. The stable and warm connection to her mother was gone. She hadn't realized how many connections she'd had to the outside world beyond her body. And now, with everything quiet, there was nothing but Tarath herself, Kedra, and the duel between them. It was exhilaration. The sound of occult edges striking each other in a beautiful choreography of desperation and intention, all intermixed with the whoosh of swift bodies constantly moving through the air without pause. An unending dance with no name, being made on the spot. The cloud of occult sparks far too close to the dancers, lighting the stage. Like a duel out of the stories and plays humans had written, something grander than life. Was this why Tuekar hounded after Atius, even after centuries? Was he chasing after this one moment of serendipity? She'd never experienced this before. Never had to truly squeeze out every last bite of her abilities just to hold her ground against an opponent. It was beautiful. Unique. Personal. Red warning signs began to appear in her vision, choking out the comfortable yellow she'd grown used to. Errors. Heat buildup. Decohertion. Combat subroutines were spitting out occasional garbage data at an increasing rate, tainted by melting transistors and failing capacitors. The CMO's system was breaking apart, heat sinks overwhelmed, and many backup parts physically disconnected or outright destroyed by the early damage she'd willingly taken. A small part of her knew if she continued at this rate, her body would fail her. Safety systems would yank control away from her, as if she were a child that had gotten too close to a stovetop and couldn't be trusted anymore. She was winning the fight, but losing it at the same time. Tarath was so close. Kedra's shields were hovering around 10%. At this point, the difference between shields and no shields was 443 milliseconds of prolonged contact. A blink of an eye and the fight would end. Dozens of weaving strikes flew from her each second. Tarath only needed one of her hits to land. Just a single one. But the human battered her back somehow again and again. Worse, she could tell from her proximity alerts that 4 signatures were rapidly approaching. She didn't have time to pay more attention. A final error message obscured all others, remaining front and center in her vision. All other error messages being minimized. 10 seconds until total system shutdown. The end of the line. No, 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 no. She just needed more time. The human was exhausted. Movement and motion was slowing down, combat logs all pointed it out as fact, a graph showing a steady and predictable decline within plus or minus 3% deviation. She'd stopped being able to retaliate, forced to defend against the feather just to simply survive. Kedra had a mental limit and Tarath knew they must be rapidly approaching it. 5 seconds until her opponent's speed was estimated to drop below the threshold she needed to overpower and kill the girl. So close. Tarath only needed to hold on. 7 seconds until total system shutdown. Terror and panic began to creep into her mind as she saw the prediction slope start to even out, and then flatline. The next series of 20 strikes and counters passed, but the human was holding the graph line steady at 5 seconds, the line wavering, but refusing to drop under that number, subsystems constantly being forced to recalculate a new EDA. Somehow, the human was powering through her exhaustion. Tarath was so close to victory. Hate, fury, wrath, she fed it all into her combat systems. She screamed, desperate now to batter past her opponent's mental resilience. A dozen sword strikes came crashing out, all expertly weaved together in under 2 seconds, every single one lethal. And still Kedra held on. Pure single-minded focus spent on holding off the feather. A wall of blades that let nothing past her, the graph stubbornly remaining just above 5 seconds. 5 seconds until total system shutdown. She'd crossed the threshold. Tarath knew that as a machine, she physically could not surpass hard-coded limits. Once her internal damage sensors crossed the shut-off point, it would shut off everything. The human was overcoming her own limits, while Tarath had reached her own. Impossible. For a horrifying moment, she felt utterly inferior to a human. It seared her mind, shook her foundations, broke her pride. There'd been a last trade of blades as both of them had passed by one another. Tarath curled down, twisted on herself, and sprang out to catch her opponent's retreating back. The fight needed to end now. 2 seconds until total system shutdown. She lunged forward, one sword held underhand, wings stretched out wide, her body sailing through the air, slowly suspended by time and inertia. Ahead, Kedra had also committed to a duck, turn, and lunge. An all or nothing. They'd both chosen the same move at the same time. One final move from both of them to end it all. 1 second until total system shutdown. A knife blurred towards Taratha's face, fainting past her underhanded long sword. The feather's other long sword was already committed to parrying the second knife and unavailable. Her body was suspended in midair, there would be nowhere to dodge. 1,000 possible counters sprang to mind and she was drawn only to one by instinct. It felt right. One of her legs touched the ground. She didn't use it to dodge, instead pushed forward, continuing the sprint. Kedra mimicked the motion, also committing to the last strike, knife making final adjustments. The feather tilted her head to the side, calculating she'd be able to move just fast enough to avoid critical systems from being damaged, using her wings to help move her a few inches faster, time crawling around her. Slowly, the command went through, sent across gold wires deep within her superstructure, her neck straining against the physical forces that rippled around her. The ancient Winterscar knife sunk into the side of her cheek, the occult edge cutting a deep wound effortlessly. And then it exited past, just under her ear, cutting through nothing critical. She'd done it. Moved just in time out of Kedra's killing blow. Her own white and violet blade completed the rotation on her open palm, her mechanical fingers wrapped around the hilt again and let the inertia of their charge carry the relic armor into range. The blade edge connected. Blue relic shields flared as the heirloom armor was overloaded and its shields broke in slow motion. Taratha's blade continued forward unimpeded, carving directly into the relic armor helmet. The tip sank a sliver of an inch, metal vanishing as the occult's destructive edge met reality and shredded it apart. It cut through systems and circuits, breaking the helmet. Only not quite deep enough to break the fragile human protected inside. Kedra had twisted her head, human reaction speed now catching up, the sword racking a massive gash across the entire helmet side instead of sinking further. The feather saw all of this, time still slowed to her senses. She only needed to correct the direction of her blade. Twist her wrist a little further, and the inertia would drive the whole thing right through metal, skin, blood, skull, flesh, and soul. The girl could not move fast enough to escape. She would die here. Tarath could cut her head off the limp body and send it to the surface in a decorative box as she'd intended. She had won. And yet, her wrist didn't move. How strange. Tarath thought, watching the wrist remain frozen, surprised at her choice. The blade held still, the destructive edge passing by, leaving a faint trace of fading blue on the relic armor helmet. In a half-second, her window of chance would vanish forever. The wrist remained, unmoving. How strange, that The two opponents flew past each other, both killing blows missing their mark. Both watching the other sail by, wind and turbulent ash trailing behind each. How strange that I don't want this to end. System shutdown initiated. 100 subsystems all crashed, closing unexpectedly. Overclocks halted, programs unsafely terminated, leaving endpoints barren of data, everything crashing through her system like heavy slabs of falling metal snapped loose from strained wires with destructive whiplash. The feather stood frozen in her final strike, blade still lifted up in position as her system rebooted, bits of dust kicked free and blowing away as her halted legs slid on the ground to a stop. A beat passed. Which was all the time Kedra needed to continue her steps, far into safe distance, a hand already yanking off her damaged helmet so she could see clearly again. Twisting around to see the feather recover from her frozen pose. Violet glowing eyes locked upon piercing blue ones. The human looked exactly as Tennyson's memory had shown her. All except for a thin red line of blood, leaking from her forehead, down past her right eye, and all the way to the side of her cheek. Sweat dotted her brow, free now from the relic helmet's cleaning. Mixing with the blood and doing little to dilute the color. "What are you?" Kedra asked again, a breath between each word, exhaustion clear. "You fight like him." "How?" The feather smiled widely. The horrible cut through her own cheek made the entire expression look unhinged, the metal underneath clearly visible. "Of course I fight like him. He taught me all I know." System still rebooting. Diagnostics showed hundreds of subsystems listed as permanently destroyed, the hardware melted through too many redundancy points. Damage reports continued endlessly in her vision. She needed a new body. Her shell had been crippled. Never. He would, never help, a machine. "A lie. You lie," Kedra said, hands and chest shivering, as if the armor itself was struggling to stay upright. Adrenaline was likely crashing through her system, taking its toll. The mental strain of the duel had been outright debilitating for Tarath, and she was a machine. She couldn't understand how a human could still be standing after such an ordeal. "I never said it was willingly taught," Tarath answered, all too happy to keep talking. She needed to buy more time for her systems to cool off and recalculate what could be done with what was left working. Time she wasn't going to get as she noticed the field around her. Her chosen were dead, dying, or rooted. The surface knights had eliminated her group of survivors. And now they were here, slowing down from their sprint to take their place behind their leader. Kedra looked to her left, where a teal knight slowed to a walk, helmet giving her a worried glance that the battered girl shrugged off. "Take the feather alive," Kedra ordered, breath rapidly catching up. "She has answers I want." Windrunner gave a salute, then stalked forward, blade drawn. 3 other knights in red came from the sides, cutting her paths of escape. There were no words. No taunts. None even questioned their orders to fight a near-mythic enemy that anyone else would consider a suicide mission. The surface savages went to work instead, all as one. The blades came at her, quick as lightning, and she fought back with just as much rage. These knights were noticeably slower than Kedra, but there were 4 of them, and Tarath was exhausted, unable to overclock any part of her system, and greatly damaged. Still, she was a feather. And she held the skill and power of Tennyson Winterscar. 4 surface knights might be beyond her current abilities, but they couldn't stop her either. She battered their weapons away in a spinning whirlwind of precise strikes, forcing a window open, letting her leap into the air, wings spreading out to make an escape. Kedra had been waiting for just such a moment. Drawing on one last pool of willpower, leaping out herself, daggers flaring out one more time. Cutting the feather's wings off in a midair twist, wrapping an elbow around Taratha's chest in a lopsided hug, and forcing the enemy back into the ground with a heavy crash. Swords bit down on the Taratha's unshielded arms, cutting them off while heavy armored boots stomped down on her legs, grinding down until the metal began to bend. In moments, Taratha's shell was no longer functioning. Black oil leaking out of her many wounds, new error messages floating around her vision without stop, joining the still growing damage report list. How had it ended like this? And the ghost of Tennyson staring down at her with disgust. He'd gotten out somehow, in the chaos. That was worrying. She smiled back at him, despite it all. We should cut her down now while we have the chance. Take her swords and run. The teal one said. Kedra's hand went up, the sign to halt. No. No, she's the one behind the siege on the city. If we kill her right now, she'll simply return somewhere else. We need to capture and contain her somehow until we've dealt with the invasion. You're far too late for that, humans. Tarath said, pinned down as she was. My army is already here. I've won. Indeed, her army had reached the gates and begun to climb the walls. The recaptured turrets had bought the humans time, but hadn't bought them enough. Already Undersider knights at the ramparts were being cut to pieces, scattered into groups, or outright surrendering. The day was over. Shut it, machine. One of the Red Knights said, kicking Tarath's head with a relic-powered boot. Tarath just laughed as one of her eyes lost signal from the damage. As if she finally understood a joke the world whispered in her ear. How nostalgic, she thought. She had only one eye left working again. Her body, broken and battered, all her legs and arms cut. Standing at death's door, watching her execution. All caused by a Winterscar again. Her history, it seemed, loved to repeat itself. Least we have this creature. Another Red Knight said, her voice filled with contempt. We can extract information at a more opportune time. And where will you hold me? Tarath continued laughing. Her voice was distorted. The vocal cords had been damaged from that kick. There is no safety anywhere besides the city. The anti-machine barrier would shred what's left of my shell the moment you cross the city limits. Anywhere you take me, my army will know. You can't hide from them while I remain. Time flies by, humans. How long do you have until there is no escape left? The machines had passed the ramparts, flooding into the barracks and garrisons. Service staff were surrendering by the dozens. Only a few pockets of resistance were left, taking shelter inside the tower, preparing for a final stand. Fuck. Windrunner said. The scraphead's right. We need to go, my lady, now. And the feather? What do we do with her? One of the Red Knights asked. Kedra stared down at the ruined shell of the machine. One violet eye looked back at her, still dimly lit, flickering but very much still alive. Somehow this machine had been emulating her father's style. That wasn't possible, he had been left behind at the bunker. Blue eyes widened. Deep inside the family armor, at the side of her ribs, a backup soul fractal bloomed to life and Kedra dove inside it. She searched through what lay before her with renewed sight, this time focusing her occult vision, searching, and found him. A dagger whisked into her hand. She dove straight forward, knife cutting through the metal sternum, cutting into the machine, searching for the resonance she felt. Tarath knew when it was time to cut and run. 11 miles into the bowels of the earth, a pair of soul fractals blazed to life, connected with the fractal of unity. Her backup. Artificial souls couldn't move from fractal to fractal. Not like organic souls could. But with the unity fractal, anything could be done. She synced herself with it, feeling an instant connection to her mother, then stepped away from her shell, dragging the chained soul with her, like a puppy on a leash. Only to be yanked back to a stop. The soul didn't move. Somehow, Tennycent was holding tight to the gateway, like a boulder stuck against too narrow an entry. He was fighting back. Panic shot through Tarath. The Winterscar occult knife continued to rip through, right below her throat, unerringly cutting a path as if the girl simply knew where to find Tennycent. I'll detonate the shell. Tarath screamed at the stubborn captive, trying and failing to shove the prisoner past the entry, pulling at the chain as hard as she could, only getting inches at a time. She has no helmet. No shields. I could kill her right here, right now. Relic-powered gauntlets dove down and began to peel the metal plating covering, slowly, as if it were made of stubborn tin. "What in the gods are you doing, Winterscar?" one of the Red Knights said, horror in his voice as he saw Kidra continue to butcher into the broken machine. Tenicent faltered. He slipped a few more inches down, willpower being sapped. "Surrender this struggle, now, or she dies." Tarath snarled, bypassing through ruined safety locks, manually opening the bits of accessible systems left in the shell and overloading whatever power cells were still connected. More of her subdermal plating was ripped away, and then Kidra unhooked her armored gauntlet from her hand and reached down. Finger and palm touching the glowing plate deep under the mess of broken gold wires and silver metal. A third presence appeared in Tarath's panicking mind. The feather recoiled from the intrusion. Kidra barreled through with single-minded intent, a hand reaching out to the old wolf. "Father! Oh gods, it's really you!" Now connected to the soul fractal, her tired mind raced through ways to save him. "There's a spare soul fractal on my left side, come with me." "What are you babbling about? Are you out of your tiny mind?" Anka shouted to the side, while the other knights brought out their swords in response to the sound of footsteps crossing the courtyard. Hundreds of them, moments away from the small huddled group. Tenicent saw the outstretched hand of his daughter reaching out to him, pleading. "A way out. A way home." He held on, fingertips desperately holding tight to whatever purchase he could grip onto with his mind, while his other hand reached out to clasp against Kidra's. Connection. The addition of her willpower surged through him, turning the tides, giving his own exhausted soul the strength to pull against the feather's grip. Together, they were slowly pulling him out. "I'll kill her. I can always build a new shell. She can't. The explosion will kill her, rip that head right off her shoulders. Don't make me do this." He turned to look down at the receding void under him. A darkness, leading somewhere deep within the earth, like the jaws of hell itself. A pressure trying to drag him down, sucking him through that horrible fractal attached to his cage. If he fell, the machine would never let him escape again. He'd revealed too much of his discoveries. "I will kill her," Tenicent. Power cells were all supercritical. A single shock would level the ground around them. Tarath's mind hovered over the command. Tenicent turned to his daughter, smiling. "Proud of you," he said. "Just, proud." His hand opened, letting go of her arm. The void under yanked him away like an angry stream, ripping him from Kidra's grasp and dashing him against the rocks. Until there wasn't a single sign of him left in the dimming fractal. He felt chains wrap around his arms, neck, and chest. Strangling him, pressing down on all sides as he floated down into the abyss. The monster was angry at him. He didn't fight it, letting himself sink further away. The monster was many things. But she would keep her word. Whether a quirk of her personality, or her unwavering pursuit of direction, the monster always meant what she said. Unless she lied to herself about it. But not this time, he knew. Tarath breathed a sigh of relief, clutching the cell of her prisoner, burying him under every last bit of security she could get. Deep within the spare soul fractal safely miles away. She'd almost lost him. The thought troubled her far more than she could understand right now. Far more than she wanted to think about. She buried the uncomfortable thoughts deep down, fled from them. "We'll meet again. Remember this. Remember me." She had her body say, one last message distorted from the damage taken, a wide smile left frozen on her face as Kidra stared back in horrified silence. It felt right, it felt fitting. Tarath input a final set of commands that brought her broken shell back from supercritical to nominal. Power cells faded across her system alerts, safely turning off one after another, all logs showing gray and inert. She reached the last cell and sent the last set of commands. The connection cut. Book 2, Chapter 35, Crafting Occult Weapons for Profit and Destruction. A knock on the sliding door drew me back from my daydreaming. "Master Keith," the voice said, clearly belonging to Zagreus, my captain of the guards. A curt and professional man who clearly took to Keedra's views on keeping things organized. "House Insight has the next delivery of chains ready for you. House Hammersmith also arrived with a message informing you that they've made good on their delivery and await for you to personally pick it up, as you instructed," he said, trim and proper. Ever since my talk with Lord Atius, I'd been granted a writ of request, signed by him and with no limits. That's a lot of responsibility thrust on my shoulders, so of course I made sure to abuse it as often as humanly possible. Hence all sorts of trips like these around the clan at odd hours of the day. "Great, I'll be right there. Gather up a squad of men and we'll set off to go visit the cranky bastards and pick up our commission," I answered back, stamping the Winterscar seal on one last requisition paper before folding it up and setting it aside. Work never gets done. When I come back, I swear there will be another pile to deal with. How Keedra managed to be so diligent about everything was beyond me. I was already late on a few dozen things and it's only been a matter of days since she left. Outside the estate gate, 4 Winterscar soldiers stood at attention, along with Zagreus. We exchanged nods as the estate gates opened up and the small team set out. Ever since the Chosen had set up camp by the lower levels, I've never left the estate grounds without Journey and a few soldiers at my side. Call it a bit of healthy paranoia. Oh, they've been an agreeable lot, all things considered. They volunteer to help out with minor tasks, share some of their medicine and supplies, have generally not caused any trouble, and more importantly, they sent out the majority of their relic knights to go deal with the budding raiders staging grounds, miles and miles away from us. The priest was making a ruckus though. Giving impassioned speeches and being a general nuisance. The freedom didn't do him any good. Something of an undercurrent had spread among the clan. I don't know if it was Lord Atius that planned that out, or if it arose naturally, but it was a thing of genius and seemed well in character for the crafty Deathless to orchestrate. It became a matter of pride to shut down and ignore the priest's words. The argument the Chosen made didn't matter. All of it was pitted against the patriotic pride, where anyone who listened or agreed with his viewpoints would be seen as letting the clan down. Legis could have all the facts, logic, and data right, none of it was working out for the poor bastard. The clan had closed ranks among themselves and stubbornly refused to acknowledge any rhetoric. Even worse, the more convincing he tried to be, the more people dug in their heels in as if they had been personally insulted. Must have been driving him crazy, or at least it would have if I were in his shoes. He took it well, all things considered, still volunteering and working among people, still trying to befriend everyone, and still not giving up when they gave him the cold shoulder or cordial treatment. Lord Atius didn't need to come up with any counter-speech, nor appear wherever the wily priest was to give a counter-speech. No, the clan lord left the priest free to do his own thing in the most backhanded manner possible. Paradoxically, the more he ignored the chosen priest, the more people ignored him too. Which let our clan lord tend to his own plans in peace while the people did all the resisting for him. While I'd been working on making weapons of mass destruction that I had no doubts would land me in history as a villain, the clan lord had gone all in on his own power ramp. Specifically selecting a set of knights to train the Winter Blossom technique to, no secrets held between them. In the hidden reaches of the clan, he trained those knights with the new technique. The Shadow Song incident had made him decide it was better to get on with everything than brood for a few more weeks about the best plan forward. Keedra had already passed down the technique from the moment she'd discovered it, marching straight into his office without appointment from what I'd heard. Unfortunately, besides being able to detect the soul fractal if his hand was on it, Atius himself wasn't able to move his soul into it. Nor was he able to see the world with occult vision. At all. For a deathless, an immortal power straight from legend, that seemed odd to me how regular human beings were able to do things he was incapable of. He was still running experiments and trying to figure it out, last I heard. Still. Despite not having any hands-on experience with the Winter Blossom technique, Kedra had left enough documentation and knowledge that Lord Atius could teach the selected knights in confidence, which included Shadow Song. Speaking of him, I wasn't the only one who played it safe walking out on the streets. Not even a quarter of the way to House Hammersmith's estate, a familiar relic knight and 5 Shadow Song soldiers crossed paths with us, folding into our formation with practiced ease. The Winterscar soldiers were well used to this at that point, so nobody made any moves to stop it, instead shifting over wordlessly to let the Shadow Songs join rank. The Shadow Song Prime matched my pace and walked at my side, like a shadow. I don't know if Atius had ordered him to keep me safe just in case, or if it was his own choice. But he certainly must have had scouts posted by my estate entrance that would inform him anytime I stepped out, in which he would appear like a hawk within minutes. It was awkward at first, since the man's default social setting was to stay quiet with a hand on the hilt of his sword. He didn't even explain himself at first until I asked, in which he simply said he was guarding me as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. After the first dozen trips running around the clan and dealing with getting the other houses to do my Machiavellian bidding, I got more used to his set of quirks. At the very least, I could understand more about why Anka was the way she was. "How goes training with the clan lord?" I asked him over our encrypted comms. These days, keeping secrecy was a top priority, especially with the kinds of powers we were dealing with. "Steady. Idrigar is the most recent of our ranks to succeed. I suspect the other 7 need more combat experience before they can stand their own. Even with your technique, it is unlikely any of them will be able to defeat Lord Atius anytime soon." See, there's a sentence you wouldn't hear very often. Defeat Lord Atius. I wasn't there to see it, but I did get informed of the event. Shadow Song was taught the secret and took to it about as fast as Kedra had. Quick reminder that even with the Winter Blossom technique, I was losing the fight against him when I dueled the man. Now that he had the technique himself, he'd taken on Lord Atius in single combat, and won. Without a doubt, he was the single most dangerous man to be around. Good thing he was on my side now. Not that this achievement was uncommon for long, however. I think we should be pretty damn happy with 13 of the knights beating Lord Atius. Don't forget, he's a deathless. People being able to beat him isn't the norm in the first place. If only 7 of our knights can't beat him with the Winter Blossom technique, I think that's already really good. According to what I know about our clan, every few decades, a prodigy in combat would be born that could duel and defeat our resident deathless. This happened less and less over time as Lord Atius grew more skilled by dint of having more years of practice. Atius himself had told me he was never a prodigy at the blade, only that he trained relentlessly and consistently for longer than any man has lived. As of the record, it had been 113 years since he'd last been beaten by anyone in the clan. Father had been the closest to that point, but he hadn't been enough. The Deathless had 400 years of experience and his own relic armor senses honed to near perfection. He still couldn't move quite as fast as the knights using this technique. Yesterday, Lord Atius was beaten by not 1, but 4 of the 20 knights. The day before, he'd been beaten by 9. The Winter Blossom technique was an utter cheat, though to be fair Atius wasn't using any of his own powers. That wasn't even the main problem. Once the knights were using the occult vision correctly, like Kedra explained, almost all of them could see every move Atius planned. Precognition was an advantage nobody could surmount. Assuming the knights were able to see concepts of combat, which wasn't always a sure thing. The occult vision was a strange thing where everyone had something more unique to their own personal biases. "He's been a pretty good sport about all this," I said. "If I were an undefeated champion over 100 years, and suddenly the kids I watched grow up waving sticks at each other started mopping the floor with me, I'd be a bit miffed about it. Not in his nature to care about such concepts." Shadow Song scoffed. "He doesn't see any of this as a personal failure. Rather he sees it as a massive leap forward for the clan as a whole." Fair point. Any other deviations on the occult site? I asked, changing the subject. That part always fascinated me ever since Kedra and I compared our differences. It was like each person gained their own personal superpowers depending on what they were most familiar with. Most of the veteran knights who'd lived and breathed the schools of combat got the ability to see concepts of combat in their opponents. But that might not be the only thing they gained. Tanarus sees concepts of loyalty in people. Shadowsong said. Amaranth isn't able to pinpoint some of the more exotic movements in a few of the combat schools, but she is relatively young in comparison to the rest. It's to be expected she wouldn't be as familiar with them. A few other of the newer knights like her also can't see concepts of combat as well as the veterans can. Varys is able to see people at a far longer distance than anyone else, however. The others are all standard vision as far as we logged. We've been keeping tally on what the sight grants each of us in depth. Are you seeing different things? When I have my occult sights turned on, I see concepts of machinery around me. I can tell that behind that wall are a few pipes connected to the main water supply, for example. I knocked on the wall as I passed, the metal making hollow pinging noises. Ever since the Shadowsong incident, I've been diligent about keeping the technique running at all times. Walking and talking in it even. Not quite to the level of sleeping with it, but getting there. You are the only knight to be able to see such things. Shadowsong said. In addition to concepts of combat, I've recently come to understand that my own sight grants me concepts of danger as well, or hostile intentions people may have. It has proven to be almost as useful as the speed your technique allows, though harder to understand at first. I whistled. That speed increase let Shadowsong consistently win. That's not something to scoff at if he said the other part of the sight was nearly as game-changing to him. It would not be an overstatement to consider our clan as the single most powerful one in the world right now. We had dozens of knights that could fight at or beyond the level of a deathless. No one else had that going for them. Those raiders were going to have their party ruined unless they came in with overwhelming force. What is your objective with House Hammersmith? Shadowsong asked after a few minutes of comfortable silence. Normally he doesn't ask anything, so maybe he was slowly opening up a bit. I had decided a while ago that I'd discuss the reparations after we were done with the raiders, and he'd taken me at my word on that. I had them forge me basic blades, which I'll be converting into occult blades once they're back home. Another nod. How many have you requested for? I hummed, about 600. Enough to outfit all of our retainer houses and some of the regular military. Unreasonable number. He answered back dryly at what was an entirely unreasonable amount of occult blades. Most clans didn't amass more than 200, in total. Think it'll be enough? I asked a little sarcastically. He scoffed again. What I think, is that I'm starting to feel pity for the enemy. Which is unbecoming and profoundingly unnerving, considering the enemy are savage subhuman filth out to enslave, pillage and torture for nothing more than coin and sadistic pleasure. I gave him a grin, that my relic helmet unhelpfully hid. But somehow I think he could tell. Just wait till you see the other project I'm working on. If you feel sorry for the rank and file, you're going to feel horrified for their knights. What have you crafted? He asked. I could almost imagine a raised eyebrow, but I didn't miss the beat of curiosity in him. It's the reason I've been running around collecting parts like people owe me money. You're going to love them. I'm fairly certain the raiders are not going to share that sentiment. I chuckled darkly at that. Fairly certain. Gods, I'm pretty sure even the Winter Blossom technique isn't enough to beat these beauties. True power is not letting the enemy even have a chance. What, exactly, have you crafted? He asked again. I call them night breakers. I said, drumming my fingers together like the evil little gremlin I am. The soldiers around us couldn't hear what we talked about, but they gave no attention to my antics. My men have seen me do this almost daily by now. They're exactly the kind of weapon that sets up a fair fight. I told him. And by that, I mean my definition of a fair fight, which is entirely unfair to everyone else. Book 2, Chapter 36, The Best Kind of Kill is Overkill. With a name like that, I would have dismissed it as fantasy had it come from any other reacher. However, I'll not make the same mistake ever again. What are these night breakers? The streets cleared before us as we passed through the central market hub, our group of mixed soldiers briskly escorting us. Formality really, since Shadowsong and I were far more powerful than any gang of soldiers. My soldiers, and by my, I mean my sisters, were all veteran and highly trained. Outside my armor, I wouldn't be able to beat a single one of them. Inside the armor, it was only a matter of time until I did. But those years of combat and expeditions my soldiers had to their name are worth something. A single occult blade could turn any of them from a throwaway thought to a danger that needed to be taken seriously by any knight. All because of the right equipment. How unfair is that? Something I planned to change once occult weapons would become more accessible. For now, they escorted us for tradition's sake and to give off an imposing aura associated with relic knights. Plus, with the size of our group, people naturally saw us coming and had ample time to make way. Curious thing about occult blades, I said into our encrypted comms, is how simple they actually are under the surface and secrecy. The electronic components were made of a standard power source, a capacitor, and an activation switch. It's like a child's first electric circuit. I am no reacher. I do not subscribe to these topics. Exactly, I think the warlocks were the same. They didn't trust engineers of any kind to their secrets, so they had to make do with their own skills. The power core is the only thing that is more complicated, and I use that term lightly. I said, giving it air quotes. It was made to work with power cells set up in the storage configuration, with the output set slightly above the voltage threshold needed by the fractal. I'd give them points for that, if the design wasn't a mass-manufactured part anyone could buy off street vendors. All in all, I give the craftsmanship a 2 out of 10. It works, but gods could it have been made better. Understandable why the warlocks used crossbow bolts instead of bullets like civilized men. Winterscar. Shadowsong said, with something of an amused tone. Spare me the details. Did you make occult bullets? As a matter of fact, I didn't make bullets. Skipped that whole step and went to the real dangerous ratshit. An occult bullet flying out faster than the speed of sound would hit the relic armor shields for a fraction of a second, and then ping away, doing only a few percentage of damage and then being a pain to recover. The warlocks probably figured that out and didn't need to come up with anything more interesting. So instead of making bullets, I made something utterly evil, even for Winterscar standards. I went into the details with him on the walk over, ranting all the while. He only had to tell me to cut to the chase 3 more times before I really got to it. They looked like cylinders, a little on the fat side, and would take up the palm of my whole hand. Like bullets, these fat grenade-sized balls of fuck you were designed to fly fast at some poor soul and ruin their day. And promptly their life right after, if the math worked out. The way it went is this: on initial contact, a pressure sensor at the top of the grenade-shaped ball would be triggered by whatever it hit. After which, 4 small metal doors would open up on the sides in a fraction of a second, revealing 4 chambers. Shadowsong had to fast-forward me past this part rather insistently, because I kept going into the exact method the pressure sensors worked. But I digress. Inside were chains. Chains? He asked. Yes, chains. Those would promptly fly out from leftover inertia and wrap around on anything in the way. I thought about adding small explosions to speed up the process, but testing showed I didn't need to do anything extra. Since the whole thing was rotating the entire way like a bullet, that rotational energy carried through into the chains pushed them outwards, and the inertia change from the initial speed forward to a stop at impact would force the extended chains forward. Winterscar. Okay. Look, the point is, after my night breakers hit home, the chains wrap around their target. And here's where the lethal part of this whole nightmare contraption came into play. Every single chain link has been inscribed with the occult blade fractal. Turns it into the world's deadliest hug. He nearly paused in his walk, the implications catching up to him. Clever. Very clever. Shields become a non-issue. On record, it takes about 4 to 5 seconds of prolonged contact with an occult edge for relic armor shields to fail, depending on the surface area of the occult edge doing the work. Note that this number generally comes from one single occult blade. Like Shadowsong had guessed, my Nightbreakers didn't take 4 seconds. No, the relic shields broke within milliseconds of contact. With each link being a cutting edge of its own, on both sides, that's a lot of surface area in contact with relic shields. Which all adds up. By the time the relic armor shields were down, the chains still had momentum, so they would continue moving. And occult blades don't do friction. Whatever they cut through, it was vaporized from existence. When testing the first Nightbreaker on Journey, making sure no one was inside of course, what happened was a flash of light as the shields overloaded the instant the strike hit in a halo of occult blue. And then the halo would slow down, and become 4 glowing tentacles that would cut right through the chest plate, flailing around violently the whole way. Trying to wrap around anything, only to cut through material like it didn't exist, bashing on and off against one another in rattling rage. The relic armor had collapsed in chunks, with the Nightbreaker bouncing off and settling on a spot in the ground, occult blue fading off after the pressure plate at the front was released and the voltage toggled off. This would be a messy and near instant kill on anything it hit. Even if it curled around an arm and severed it, the relic armor itself was now shieldless. Its wearer missing an arm and rapidly losing blood. Easy pickings for whoever shot the Nightbreaker to close in and finish the job. Worse if it was done outside in the freeze, that arm wound would be an instant death sentence. I confess I've had moments where I've asked my mirror if I'm the villain here. And then I remind myself that these weapons are going to be used against people who would skip the mirror talk entirely and go right to the sacking, looting, and enslaving. With torture sprinkled in for fun, of course. What I'm saying is that I have reasonable grounds to negotiate with the gods when they weigh my soul for this. Assuming they were actual gods and not ancient AI working for humanity. It's gotten complicated these days. The catch is that they weren't easy to make. I said. Each had to have a lot of care and attention. Is that why you've been going to all these Reacher houses lately? Getting them to work on it for you. Hit the mark on that. By myself, it might have taken me a month of work to create small handful of them. Fortunately, I wasn't alone. I had an entire clan's worth of resources to pull from, exactly as Atius had promised. A writ by his own hand made entire houses kneel and obey. Cores were crafted, exactly to my specifications. Hundreds of chain links, thousands even, all perfectly made and of quality. Not a single person batted an eye or asked questions. Maybe a raised eye and some mutterings at the bars after work, but none of them made it my problem. Only telling me an estimate on when the work will be done. 3 long days after I'd come up with the design and prototype, I already had parts shipping in for 20 Nightbreakers, all in their component pieces and sent to my personal house for the finishing touches. I estimate each full chain had about 200 individual links. All quality work too. No idea how the houses managed to forge these things that fast by hand, but somehow they did. Not to mention 20 modified rifles built to fire the demonic things at speeds nobody could reasonably dodge. Those were far more easy to manufacture however. We surface dwellers were really good at making our own guns and ammo. It's a very common item of construction around these parts, those were probably done in an afternoon. I understand why you call them Nightbreakers. These will change the entire field of battle. A common foot soldier could now eliminate a knight. Ridiculous to even consider. Shadowsong said as we neared the estate ground of the Forge Hammers. Their sentry spotted me and gave a quick call to their superior. How many have been produced thus far? Only 3. The prototype, and 2 actual rounds. Is there a bottleneck? There is. The occult fractal itself. I said. Maybe the Undersiders have more accurate printers, or the Warlocks pass down a single mold template they keep locked up in a vault. None of our printers or crafters could draw such tiny fractals within spec. And even if they could inscribe it, I'd have to come up with some clever way to hide the fractal. Because of the enemy. Exactly. It's not a matter of if they'll get their hands on this, but when. If I were the raiders and got hit by these weapons, I'd drop every plan and make sure someone somewhere gets their hands on one of these rounds as the single highest priority. And so, I have to make it all just as impossible to figure out the key. The Warlocks relied on making their weapons from metal that relic armors couldn't eat. Since I had administrator permissions, I went the opposite direction. I had Journey use a small stream of its spirit to dig into the chains, and from the inside it would inscribe an extremely faint fractal, as small and as thin as it could manage to make. After all, the fractal was entombed inside steel, so I didn't need to worry about protecting it from the elements. A tiny drop of melted steel to fill up and seal the hole, and then I'd take the cooled off parts and polish them up. The result was perfect. It took an entire day to complete all 4 chains for the prototype. Having to keep myself occupied while Journey chewed through the prototype chains had probably been the harder part of this whole process. There was a reason for the time sink. Occult edges were the only known thing that could withstand another occult edge. So each link needed 2 occult fractals. One for the outside edge and the other for the inside edge, that way the whole thing wouldn't cut itself apart. Journey could inscribe a single fractal in a little less than 30 seconds. Each chain had 200 links, and each link needed 2 fractals. It added up to 12 hours of non-stop work. I realized an obviously better method only after I'd stupidly spent the time working on the prototype, but the next pair had been done with far less suffering on my end. I put the bloody chains next to me while I slept, waking up every so often in the night to move the chains around and unblock any issues while Journey continued the work. Terrible sleep, but I was sleeping on the floor in a relic armor each night so far, so sleep quality was already poor to begin with. At least the time passed by faster. Kept berating myself for not thinking of doing that sooner. Kedra would scold me for not taking care of myself, but how exactly is anyone supposed to do that trapped in a relic armor 24 hours a day, for weeks? When I realized that the first batch of chains came back as 80 in order to create a theoretical 20 rounds, I realized it simply wasn't feasible to make them all with one armor. Easy fix to this was to involve the other relic knights. They already knew I had cracked the occult code, so they could loan me their armors when not in use. The Grey Goo protocols hard-locked a few features outright, like creating anything outside of a designated set of template items, specifically for the armor, even with administrator permission. But destroying material was more loose in terms of rules. The armors could choose what to eat and not eat. They had to, otherwise they'd be eating the user instead of just the dirt and sweat on the surface skin. But being ordered by a guest user was something Cathita told me the armors took less than kindly to. And by that, I mean they would give me a flat no. It makes sense now why people haven't used these armors for production. They didn't take orders about how to use their spirits. While people respected a writ by the clan lord, the armors were more snobby. Fortunately, the administrator permissions I had were enough for the armors to shrug and grudgingly agree, so I had my own version of a writ that worked on that cranky bunch. Not enough to break the rest of the Grey Goo protocols, but enough for something smaller like this. So I handed a few of Atias's trusted knights a couple of chains to cuddle up with overnight, gave them instructions, and they left their armor to do its work. With the clan on lockdown, knights weren't being sent out of the clan for expeditions, so there wasn't any waste of armor uptime. The second time sink came down to that drop of melted steel, which would fill up just the entrance of the hole drilled into the chains, leaving the interior fractal alone. That and sanding down the excess would take at least a minute each. Which would also add up to a few days of non-stop sleepless work to get all done. Unlike relic armors, people did take Atias's writ as reasonable permission and were more than happy to take that part of the work off my hands. In certain definitions of happy, of course. So far, I'd sent the chains back to the engineering houses 4 at a time with instructions to fill in the tiny holes on the chains and polish it off. Like before, they didn't ask any questions or raise a single eyebrow. Instead, they politely bowed, and then passed off the crate of chains back to the engineers for a second look. It was a long process all put together, with moving parts everywhere. Getting these rounds made was going to take some time and effort to organize every step of the way. The gates to House Forge Hammer opened up, and a long heavy wooden crate was carried over by 4 engineers, one on each side. They dropped it off, being replaced by Winterscar soldiers who easily picked up the box and were already making their way back to where Shadowsong and I chatted. One of the engineers walked up to me. "Master Keith, Master Shadowsong. I have an inventory, 500 common swords following the design template sent, and 100 alternate variation following your specific request. I'll take your word for it," I said. "Did they come out well?" He nodded. "Never designed crucible swords like these, the materials were far more expensive to source and produce, but we managed it with the help of the other houses pitching in. I'm not sure these will fool anyone, however, sir. They don't look like any occult blades I've seen before." "Oh, trust me. I don't need to fool anyone. These swords have a very specific use I aim for. They've got all the bells and whistles like occult blades would." The engineer shrugged. "Yes. It's all inert, of course, they're excellent lookalikes. We've gone the whole route and had each powered as well following the templates." I gave him a pat on the back, grinning behind my helmet. "Good. Good, I suppose someday you'll see what I have these blades planned for. But for now, I trust you'll keep the process secret." "As much as we can, sir. A lot of people were involved in their creation, we had 43 smiths working together to craft these. We'll do our best." Just like that, I was now 600 occult blades richer. Funny to think a small crate like that could carry such wealth. And not a soul besides Shadowsong and myself knew about it. How could they? To everyone else, these swords were just props. Strange novelty weapons that were requested to look like occult blades in all but function, except the blades themselves certainly didn't fit any occult blade anyone knew about. Until Journey had a hand in it at least. A knock sounded again on my sliding door. "Come in," I called out, shuffling papers on my desk away. I hadn't really been able to focus on any of it anyhow, so I welcomed the distraction. Zagreus stepped in, closing the door politely behind him. Then he turned, and knelt down on one knee. "You wished to see me, Master Keith?" he asked. I know it was part of expected tradition, but it still unnerved me a bit to see people kneel down like that when delivering reports or doing anything on official business. These were people I had drunk with, trained against, and even danced with on occasion. They were friends in my mind. Kedra had told me she wore 2 faces. Lady Kedra Winterscar, Prime of House Winterscar. And Kedra, just Kedra. While both identities often intermixed and touched one another, when she needed the presence of a prime, she drew it out of her. That sort of thing came naturally to her, though hardly to me. I'm an engineer in the end. I build things, I don't build people. My hands tightened a bit around a small piece of paper I'd held onto after clearing my desk. An invitation to the latest dance, hosted by the houses. Always sent by the same person. I'd missed every single one so far, for obvious reasons of security, and too much chicken shit to send a proper reply back. This one would have been no exception. Should have been no exception. Except this time I hadn't thrown it out the trash. Still, we had to play our roles, so I'd do my best to be dignified. "I have within this crate a shipment of occult blades," I told the captain, patting the smaller wooden crate at my side. I'd finished the last touches on the new blades. Not all of them, that was still 600 blades I was slowly going through, and they weren't as high priority as the night breakers. Still, Shadowsong had made a point about making sure not to place all of my hopes on one plan. Come take a look. I intend to outfit you and as many veteran soldiers in the house with these weapons. Zagreus stood, then made his way to the crate, opening it up. He likely expected to see 2 or even 3 blades, all swathed in silk. Instead, he saw about 10 blade hilts, all neatly stacked in rows. No silk, instead it was just common cardboard straw, like the weapons here were just a crate of rifles and not ancient weapons of mass power. The confusion flickered on his face for a moment, one hand reaching out to one of the blades before freezing up halfway. He darted his gaze up. "Sir, permission to inspect the blades." I shrugged, then extended a hand out. "Knock yourself out. One of them will be yours after all. Pick whichever you'd like." He swallowed, nodded, and wrapped his hands on the hilt, drawing the blade out slowly. His expression went through a few dozen emotions as the full sword came out. These weren't knives, no, they were full long swords, and they were utterly alien from the traditional blades. What he drew was a deep black and grey blade, filled with criss-crossing fiber patterns, with a silver outlined edge of metal and a deep red painted sigil at the very center of the blade. The Winterscar crest, embossed on both the counterweight at the hilt and decorated on the flat of the blade. A cylinder surrounded the blade's hilt, serving as a handguard, which was unusual on an occult blade. Those never had any handguards. Honestly, none of it looked like any known occult blade, because these had been designed for a different user than relic knights. It was clear he didn't believe this could be an occult blade. And I wouldn't blame him either. Nothing about this blade looked like a relic sword. Not until he pressed the activation trigger, and the silver edge lit up bright occult blue, making its true nature non-negotiable. The top part of the handguard ring also lit up bright blue, the edge pointed upwards. His face went through a far different range of emotions this time. Confusion, shock, happiness, and then shock again. Likely realizing this could only mean one thing: I knew how to craft occult blades. It wasn't lost to him just how important of a secret that was to keep. "Carbon fiber center with a magnesium blade edge," I said, while he remained silently inspecting the weapon. Normal relic blades were intended for armored use. They're heavy and unbalanced because the armors negate any need for strength. Theses blades, they were forged for, he gulped. Everything I'd said probably painted a clear picture for who these blades had been crafted for. These relic blades were never meant to be used by relic armors. They're blades for unarmored soldiers. Like yourself. Perfectly balanced and light enough that you can swing and move at similar speeds against a relic knight. Not against one using the Winter Blossom technique, or a veteran. But fast enough to be able to stand a chance. Each sword was a thing of beauty in my opinion. I stood up, touching different parts of the blade he held, explaining each part as I went. Double-handed grip to allow any style of combat, with leather straps to make it comfortable to use. Light enough to use one-handed even. And I had a handguard welded in, that should give any trained knight a run for their money. If they rely too much on muscle memory without adapting, you'll have new ways of halting an attack that nobody would be familiar with. Including us. These swords would necessitate inventing brand new movements to make full use of the guard. "I'm no combat expert," I told the captain. "But you and your men are. I want you to come up with a few new moves that make the best use of these weapons." He finally broke his gaze from the blade, to look me in the eye. I could almost see his mind crunching the numbers, the options expanding outwards on what could be done with these new blades. As far as the word on the street goes, people believe these blades are ceremonial ones. Decorations that my officers will use. No one expects them to be occult blades, even if the smiths say the strange Winterscar heir wanted them made as close to relic blades as possible. I'm considered an eccentric right now. His gaze narrowed down back on mine, mind fully present as he gave a curt salute. "Sir. I'll see to it that when we draw these blades in war, the enemy will not live to report it." I believed him. I'd seen him in the training yards, along with his soldiers. The image of all of them wielding occult blades, escorting me around the clan, it made me feel more secure. All it took was the right equipment to turn a common soldier into something that could challenge a knight. To turn a glorified escort into something far more real with teeth. Maybe I'd done enough, finally, and I could take that rest. My hands tightened on that invitation slip. The sender's name still legible in that scribbled calligraphy of hers. I really should send her a reply. Book 2, Chapter 37, Tango for Two. While I'd been running around assembling my weapons of doom, I'd also been busy with conspiracy ratshit, as any good Winterscar should be doing. Except, unlike traditional values, I was working with a shadow song. Or rather, the shadow song. Which would absolutely be making all my ancestors roll in their cold graves, if not outright making them come back to haunt me one of these days. He and I had been trying everything we could think of to bait the chosen into revealing their hand. And I mean everything we could possibly think of. Resources, manpower, intelligence, even important people were left seemingly unattended. None of it was so much as sniffed at. Like our bait was subpar quality and wasn't even worth looking at the menu for. Instead, the chosen seemed to hunker down and keep to themselves, with exception to their priest. When their knights were in port, they remained within their housing, only drawing out their swords to train among each other. And when they left, they did so as one unified whole, including their captain. Leaving Legis the sole relic armor user among the chosen while their firepower was away proving their worth by breaking up raider staging grounds with witnesses to corroborate the results. Hence we had to change our tactics and consider the ways that they could engage in sneakery in the first place. We might not know what they're after, but we could potentially narrow down how they'll come after it. Whatever plan they had, they couldn't pull it off without manpower. And there were only so many chosen to supply that manpower. The regular vagrants were exactly that, vagrants. Keeping keen eyes on the whole lot wasn't too difficult since there were under 100 of them, so between the houses, we easily assigned more than one spymaster to each individual. Even the kids, just to be sure. As far as their reports came by, the majority of the chosen loitered between their temporary homes and the markets, where they bought produce and food. They didn't even frequent bars, instead they'd buy liquor wholesale and bring it back down where they'd drink among each other in smaller groups, at least the ones that liked drinking. The ultimate verdict was that these people were either all master deceivers of the highest quality, right down to the very children that hung around, or they were exactly who they portrayed to be. Lord Atius had pegged them correctly on first impression, the repeated research just proved what we already guessed. That left only two sections of the chosen that could have the ability to carry out any sabotage, the knights, whom we only had reports from a distance as they left to battle the raiders, and Legis himself, since he remained behind each time. Which meant every time the knights were away, the thought that I might be able to take a break was growing like a worm in my mind. It was during an away mission for the chosen knights that I decided I'd had enough and needed a break from wearing journey day in and day out with only Catheta for company. I needed to feel human contact again, to sleep soundly in my own bed, and possibly with some company too. Better company than present company at least. Although at this point, I think anyone would be better than the cranky old crone whose only source of fun was to torment me. That, of course, was not a very good argument point to Shadow Song, despite how strongly I protested not being a eunuch. But the fact that the chosen knights were miles away from the clan home was a better point in favor. Neither of us knew what the chosen were plotting, but we both knew it had to be something they'll carry out with their knights. So, I got my shore leave. And boy did it suck. Back before any of this mess, before I fell down that abyss those months ago, I enjoyed going out to the dance halls. There were a few scattered around the clan, in which each house took turns to decorate and impress their guests. One of the few social activities that mixed up different castes, like the bath, which made it a great place to spend time with my unsavory friends of different rank. Every week there was always a dance happening somewhere, each trying to outdo the others in either theme, looks or something completely novel to stand out. But I digress. I'm currently sitting at an empty table, in the few hours of actual freedom I've been able to scrounge up, and everyone in this busy hall was studiously ignoring me. A little nostalgic, but back then I usually knew what I did to deserve the treatment. This time around I hadn't the faintest idea what I could have done. This lasted for a good 5 minutes, up until an old friend of mine strode into the hall, fixed her eyes on me, and then made a direct path straight to the table. Enter Ilandri's silver stride. A head shorter than I was, with a pretty face, sharp nose, and sharper temper. The platinum hair had a volume to it that sometimes seemed to outright shimmer, until I learned she really did put small strands of reflective gold in there for effect. Now, calling her a cloud chaser would be an insult to cloud chasers. At least those people had some tact and pretended to be something else. Ilandris didn't mince her intentions, one of many reasons why we were good friends after all these years. She made it clear what she was after, how she would get it, and honestly I can't fault a person for being that honest. Everyone else tried to hide who they really were, but not Ellie. All in all a charming person. About time you showed your ugly mug around again, she said, grabbing a chair and sitting down into it with little decorum. Like I said, charming. And hello to you too, Ellie. To what occasion do I owe the pleasure? I said, raising a glass of wine to her in mock salute. You sound a little miffed. She cracked a tight grin, the kind of grin that she sported when she had come up with some creative insults and had been waiting for a chance to throw them my direction. Growing up, I had occupied a very odd position in social hierarchy. A scion of House Winterscar's current prime put me on the map for only other high-class retainers. But being clearly ostracized by the other members of my own house, that put me right back off the map. People in my status group didn't want to approach me and people under my status couldn't approach me. Left me having to go hunting to make my own friends instead of joining polite society. But there were exceptions. People that reached out a hand anyhow. Mostly social outcasts of their own, each with their own quirks. Some were outcasts because they simply didn't know how to socialize, and so bumbled from group to group trying their hand everywhere to make friends. By sheer perseverance, they'd eventually run into me. And by lack of social skills, they wouldn't know or care about my situation. Treasures all of them, really. Then there were the not-so-innocent hunters. These had been ostracized from their respective group not for lack of social etiquette but because they'd taken too many shortcuts and gotten burned for it. Ilandris was one such predator stalking the lands. She'd started off near the bottom and had a hunger for power that saw her rise up, stepping on anything in the way. Up until she took on the wrong person and got a lesson in humility. She hit the ground on her back and jumped right back up on her feet, starting from scratch all over again, likely motivated this time by sheer spite. I'd like to think that over time, her motives towards being friends with me had changed from pure greed and a bit of fondness. Pause for a second before we get into the dramatic bits, I said, partway into our habitual bickering and insult trading. Do you know why everyone's avoiding me? She raised an eyebrow, as if I was asking a stupid question. The kind of look that would usually spur me to ask even more ridiculous questions to bully her with, usually until one of her eyes started to twitch. You've been sitting here alone at the table since the dances started and you haven't put 2 and 3 together yet? Nobody knows how to approach you anymore, everything's been thrown out the airlock. They don't know where you stand or how they should be treating you. If I had to guess, they're all waiting for some kind of group consensus to form up from the ether. To which, you sitting down here must have rattled the pipe. Extremely fun for me, I'll have you know. Stepping right over their egos and squishing it under my toe. I've already caught 3 death stares in the last few minutes, though they were polite enough to look away. Come on, you're just pulling the scrap. It can't be that bad. Fine. I'll help you out this one time. She began to list out points one at a time, counting them off on her fingers. You are now a relic knight. Second in line to inherit the mantle of House Winterscar. Part of House Winterscar itself I should add, the old new house that's sucking up all kinds of high-level talent under your banner, out of nowhere. The Shadow Song Prime himself is suddenly friends with you and walks you around everywhere you go. She shot a glance to a dark corner of the room, where a relic knight was seated, arms crossed. He seemed almost asleep even, back to the wall, motionless. I'd had to compromise to get this time off. A full personal guard of my best soldiers to escort me to the hall, and the Prime standing by inside the room. This was the best deal I could talk it down to. It was a little lame to have a chaperone, but I can't complain about everything all the time. At least my personal guards were assigned to wait outside the dance hall rather than crowd in. And as if everything couldn't possibly get worse, the clan lord himself gives you a writ of request letting you ask for anything you want. I've had suitors by proxy now, hoping to get to you through me. How insane is that? I tugged. You like the attention, don't lie. Of course I do, that's not the point. Talking about the atmosphere, I saw a group of people line up together like soldiers about to set off for war, and begin to march to my little table. 3 girls, flanked by 2 men with easygoing smiles. Those weren't smiles though. That was war paint. I could tell they were anything but easygoing just from the way they walked, more like the rearguard to a dangerous expedition. It looks like there has been an unworded agreement that's been breached between all the separate factions that surrounded the field of battle here. Ellie grabbed my sleeve, shutting up mid-round, and proceeded to retreat straight onto the dance floor, much to the visible anger of the incoming party. You know you'll have to address the big question people are asking, she said, taking my hand and gently allowing me to spin her around to the slow music. I followed the footwork, reaching out for her waist while she wrapped an arm around my shoulder, bringing us far closer than the actual dance called for. Whatever could you possibly mean? I asked, words filled with mock innocence. She rolled her eyes instead as we spun slowly away from the edge. The writ, you dolt. The one the freaking clan lord wrote for you. I'll nibble your ear if you don't give me a straight answer. That's just threatening me with a good time. Do you need a tip on how to threaten people? She drew closer, out of my sight now, except for some of her platinum hair, her breath warm on my ear. I never said I'd bite gently. There's your threat. You're no fun. I grumbled. You could have gone a dozen ways with the tip comment. Gods. She dramatically dropped her head right down on my shoulder. Is sex the only thing you men think about? You got a better suggestion? I do. You tell me about the writ, and I won't maul your ear off. She whispered, letting my hands guide her across the dance floor. Clan Lord and I talked over a few beers at the bar down the street a few days ago during happy hour. We shot the scrap, laughed a bit, and he wrote me a nice letter on the napkin. All innocent fun. He's a good bloke, I should introduce you. I felt her nip at my ear and bite down. Not hard enough to draw blood, but definitely hard enough to feel the pinch. You do know we're in public, right? I said. And there's a few people who are staring at us. My ego wants to think it's me they're looking at, but there's some real hate in their eyes, and I don't remember causing problems recently. I'd remember. This seems more like a you thing. They can choke on a cornstalk and gargle what comes out. She said, admirably proving my exact point and letting my ear go for now. If it wasn't me, one of them would have won their little cat fight for dominance and come to collect you. So they're hypocrites, and sore losers. Collected? I asked, in mock offense. Of course. You're a rare trading card. Now, hold still, I need to write my name on you. Balcony? I asked, spinning her again before she could do anything to my neck. She allowed it with a pout, inching our way through to a very particular side of the room we both knew well. The dance hall was one of the few buildings that had a second floor to it, one in which was dark and not well lit. We'd been up there many times before. She didn't need to say a word, instead practically pushed me off the floor and onto the staircase. There, we made our way up. I'd worn my best for this occasion, since I didn't know when I'd get a second time. A sharp black military suit that would never go out of fashion. The only modern addition was a small half-cape, folded over itself. All at Catherine's dogged insistence. My self-appointed date sighed, slumping into a chair, then leaned forward to lay her head on the balcony railing, watching the events under her. "You look good in that, by the way," she said, rolling her head to the side to get a glance at me. "You just want to see me out of it," I said, preening. "I know, I have that effect on people these days, no need to be coy." She snorted. "This your way of telling me you bulked up finally? Come to think of it, I haven't seen you at the baths for a while now. Have you been working out in secret to impress me? So romantic, I can't wait to make fun of you." I sat down next to her, watching the dancers from up high. Far off under us, I saw the familiar relic knight, helmet looking up now, keeping me in sights. He seemed comfortable with all this, like it wasn't his first time hovering protectively over someone. Given the socialite that Anka was, I wasn't greatly surprised. Now I was the misbehaving daughter he had to keep an eye on, lest a scoundrel like Ellie runs off with me into the night. I still can't get over how a Winterscar has a shadow song as a guardian. Let alone the god's freaking prime himself. What exactly did you do to get him this docile? The man's hatred of your house is legendary. I know you're just trying to fish for information, but I'll be serious just this once," I said, then sat back deeper into my chair. "The chosen have us worried they'll pull something. Can't be too cautious. Part of the whole reason I haven't been able to spend any time with the usual suspects, you included, is because there's been one thing after another ever since I came back. This is the first time in days that I've been out of my armor. I eat, sleep, and shit in that thing. It's horrible. Even getting a night off to feel human contact again was like pulling a pipe weasel by the tail. The clan lord will handle it." She shrugged. "This is what he's always done. The regular people aren't worried, we're just watching to see what happens next. You know, I went and talked to them. The chosen, I mean," she said, then paused and rolled her eyes at me. "Knock that dumb look off your face. It's me. When have you known me not to go poking my head everywhere there might be something to my benefit? That's how I found you in the first place." "Fair point. What are your thoughts? Word on the street?" She shrugged. "I think that priest is the only one who's actually religious," she said, giving emphasis on the first mention of religious. Like it was the more pure and true version of that word, compared with the dirty peasant version that trailed behind. "I haven't met any of their knights, they were gone to do work out in the freeze by the time I came down. The rest of the people made a small community, little shanty town in the lower sections. They might feel safe being that close to the underground, but even I was feeling my hair stand on edge. Too deep. You can tell when the walls stop being made by humans and you're stepping foot too close to danger. Makes my skin crawl." She turned her head, letting her cheek rest on the back of her hands, lazily looking up at me from her comfortable spot. "So, I told you some of my intel, give me something good in return. Like the writ business?" I shook my head, tutting. "I'll need a bit more to trade something like this. I can leak what preparations my house has been doing for the raiders. Also what some of the other houses have been up to." I shook my head again. "Remember, I'm friends with Lord Atius these days. I can just ask him, and he'd tell me." She blew a strand of platinum hair away from her face, then puffed up one side of her cheeks. I had to fight myself not to pinch her. Tossing in Lord Atius into this is like making a deck filled with only I win cards. She complained. "Where's the passion? Where's the art of gossip? Isn't it supposed to be filled with wholesome traits of deeply personal information? Preferably someone else's," I said, finishing the inside joke between us. That got a grin out of her. "See? You do remember. So spill already," I can't compete with you having the clan lord whispering all the answers. Devalues everything I got. Bloody unfair is what that is. All right. Fine. You've talked me into a wall. I surrender. I sighed. Tell me what your tiny puny house is up to and I'll give you a couple bits of non-secret information you can hoard and gloat about to your friends. You first. I paused for a moment, almost incredulous. I'm already offering charity here, and you're still trying to get more? Getting a bit big for your suit, aren't you? I said, poking her side, getting her to yelp and nearly jump out of her chair. She hissed at me in return. For someone so, she was adorably ticklish. I'm certainly not full of it. I'm only trying to collect every bit I can squeeze out of you. Gods! I puffed out, is sex all you women think about? Ugh, you're disgusting. She turned away, doing a remarkable job of sounding serious. Then she rolled over with the grace and laziness of a cat. Leaning far back on her chair and plopping her feet on my legs. Take these off for me, please. Her dress shoes waggled just under my hands. Also, I wouldn't say no to a foot rub. I've been standing and running around for most of the day. Heels, you know? It's been dreadful. I did as asked, taking off her dress shoes and letting them drop on the ground. Then I tickled her feet, because I wasn't going to miss a chance that had quite literally fallen on my lap. She shook free, drew back, and gave me a few hard kicks on the side. Only when I lifted my hands up in mock surrender did she settle back into her comfortable position. Once she trusted I wasn't going to be messing around with her more, my thumbs absent-mindedly rubbed around while she and I chattered about old times. She seemed particularly nostalgic today. Time passed by comfortably. It was good to catch up. To just relax and stop thinking about all the strange events that had happened in the past month and be me again. Before any of this scrap shit had fell on top of my head. Elandris gave a genuine sigh, and this time I knew whatever she was going to say next was going to be serious. Part of me thinks this might be the last time I get to banter like this with you. Before, nobody cared about you and me in general. I liked what we had, you know. You have a funny way of showing that. She slapped my shoulder lightly. Oh, come off it. You enjoyed it. I did too. You were like a constant in my life I could always crawl back to when I needed to lick my wounds. Now it's going to be complicated. Maybe even impossible. I don't feel too different myself. I lied. What makes you think we have to stop being friends all of a sudden? Others. She waved a hand to the dance floor downstairs. It's different. You're on the map again, especially high up on that map. Only a matter of time until I get outright threatened by someone with a knife to leave you alone because I'm too far under your status. Or that you get married off in some political shitfuckery, and the new wife doesn't appreciate me being anywhere in the picture, even as old friends. We've got too much history for anyone to be comfortable. Can't blame them either. Elandris sighed. You know, even the chicken wrangler is getting worried. He actually reached out to me to see if I could get a word to you. Me? I thought he hated me like the sun hates the snow. Him? He just didn't quite get that our dynamic changed from the early days. He still thinks you're only trying to take advantage of me. Who said I wasn't? Seems to me, regrettably, I got everything I'd initially hoped for. You did end up being high-ranking, and now I have to deal with all this. She said. You know, I already learned long ago to be careful with what I wished for. I didn't need another reminder of that lesson, but here we are. The point is you're dealing with threats and clan issues so far above my pay grade you might as well be a deathless to the rest of us. It's like you're leaving all the old parts of your life behind, me included. And I'm going to complain and rant about it the entire time, of course. You know I can't really do anything about that, right? She sighed. I know. I know. That doesn't make it feel any better. She pouted again, looking away. I'm just getting dragged along with the avalanche, Ellie, and now that I'm swimming in the snow, I have to build my own shelter or freeze. Nothing motivates a man more than having absolutely no choice but to be better. And maybe when it does get better I can reconnect again. We stayed silent after that, listening to the music downstairs and just enjoying each other's company for the first time in what feels like years. No barbs between us, no jokes or roasts, just simple quiet. It's funny how months might pass between seeing one another, and the moment we do, we go right back into it like nothing had happened. Of course, that's when the bullet shots started sounding down below, followed by screaming. Both of us shot right back up on our feet and ducked behind the railing right after. Bullets were not something one hears at a dance, except if it's part of the music for some reason. These were very real sounds of bullets, and they were far too close for comfort. Downstairs, a group of relic knights were fanning out from the bits I could see, followed by a dozen thugs of some kind, each of them with rifles. They were returning fire on anyone that had the gall to shoot at them, but otherwise shouting for order and getting people to line up. 12 knights. Elandries shouted in my ear over the noise. 3 gods, I don't recognize any sigils on them. What the frick is going on? What house could possibly have 12 freaking knights? Is this some kind of coup? Why send 12 knights here of all places? Gone was idle thoughts of having fun, but instead of any panic, my mind somehow snapped into full alert. I was looking around for where Shadowsong might be, only to find him gone from his post. Wherever the man went, he'd clearly decided taking on 12 knights was going to take a more subtle approach. I was more happy that I couldn't spot him compared to the alternative. The enemy knights and their minions were clearing through the dance hall. Their armor were red, with skull signs and bones. Not machine bones, animal ones. Some sporting actual skulls. Human ones. I realized who they were and felt a chill run down my spine. Years ago, I'd seen knights like them, shooting and killing the last of the Winterscars, shortly before Father cut into my view and took both Kedra and I away from the fight, everything vanishing away in the dim blizzard. Gods! We'd been so focused on what the Chosen had on hand, we hadn't considered they could have allies. Our enemy hadn't been idle, they had plans of their own. They flashed lights at people's faces, clearly searching for someone with practiced ease and motion. Given who these knights were, it was obvious why they'd been picked for this mission. If you're trying to capture people, who better to send? I know who they are, I said, voice cold. I've seen their kind before. Slavers. Book 2, Chapter 38, Catch and Bag a Winterscar. How did Othersiders get into the clan? Ellie said, voice rising. How did they even get this deep into the clan in the first place? This isn't possible. Fear was taking hold of her, I could see the panic welling up. This can't be happening. Relax. Breathe. I said, grabbing hold of her hand and squeezing. If we don't keep a level head, we won't make it out. One thing at a time, first we need a plan to escape. We can deal with who, how or what they're here for once we're safe. She snapped an eye back to glare at me. What the frick? How are you so calm right now? Experience. What, you get into situations like this every freaking Tuesday. That's 12 knights stalking under us, rounding people up. We'd need 7 or 8 of the great houses working together to stomp them out. The sound of weapon fire downstairs had faded away to shouting, mostly orders for silence. I've been in situations a little more stressful than the typical expeditions, I said. I felt okay, rather, still lucid. I shook the thought out of my head, there was a situation to deal with right now. We can't sneak out by the lower floor, they're all over the place there. We'll need to escape either on this level or cut away through the upper section. The guards had opened fire at the intruders at first, but they'd been quickly killed or forced to surrender as more knights appeared. A single relic knight outright invalidated any conventional weapons fire. None of the guards could possibly hope to win against even one knight. But 12? The amount of knights under us was complete overkill. Or they had anticipated a difficult opponent. Shadow Song. Whoever they were, they knew he'd be here tonight. They seemed to be searching for something with the way they were fanning out as well. While the knights were searching through the stunned guests, the rest of the rank-and-file slavers quickly called up the guards to line at a wall with hands on the back of their necks. I didn't get another chance to see what was going on down there, but the follow-up sound of rifle fire made me think that prisoners weren't on their agenda. Ellie and I raced to the upper exits, only to find them locked from the outside in. The light on the doorway indicated that there was a freeze breach outdoors, which was obvious scrap shit this deep into the colony. Every part of the clan had blast doors like these built to blockade sections of the colony from possible temperature breaches, or invasions. Whoever set this whole thing up must have triggered the doors around the area. Which meant they either had access to logi accounts of some kind or they had a good engineer fooling the system in a creative way. We wasted a good 2 minutes trying to break through the door before we heard more shooting and yells. Heavy footsteps clattered nearby, climbing up the stairs, followed by piercing white flashlights swinging around. "Next floor up," I whispered, crouching down and making my way across another catwalk to reach the logi fast tracks. "There's plenty of small one-way paths up there, and the blast doors are thinner. I might be able to tinker with an override there. Less sturdy blast doors sure, but a lot more of them." Logi catwalks were a little everywhere in the clan, like the veins of the superstructure. Technically, pedestrian traffic was illegal up there so that the logi hover sleds could move around with impunity, but I'll consider paying the fees over getting shot or taken. I doubt there was any traffic happening at this time, considering the uninvited guests crawling around. Ellie followed closely behind me, not bothering to recover her heels. Barefoot was helping keep down the noise level greatly anyhow, while my own dance shoes still had that little tap to each step no matter how I tried to keep it quiet. The slavers weren't familiar with clan architecture here and it showed. The lights were swinging around wildly at the seats and under them, searching for anyone hiding in the obvious spots. Instead, Ellie and I were climbing up, reaching to a ladder into the logi fast tracks. It worked for a few moments, until we reached the first barricaded door. While the rank-and-file slavers might not have known about the fast tracks, whoever was messing with the system hadn't forgotten about these sections. Unlike the more solid blast doors down a level, there was a panel to the side of the door to each of these that I was already fiddling with, trying to see if I could override the system from here. I never got the chance. Instead, a pair of heavy footfalls hit the ground behind, rattling the catwalk. Turning around, I was put face to face with an approaching relic knight, stalking out of the darkness. I recognized the colors immediately. "Shadow Song! Out of the way!" he hissed, drawing his occult blade, the glow lighting up the small fast track. Ellie and I gratefully stepped to the side as he reached the sealed door and began to cut into it with the blade. Cutting a door wasn't as easy as it would look like. Angle of the cuts mattered. Do it wrong and the cut sections get caught into one another, requiring even more cuts to get it loose. I could tell he was focused on making sure no mistakes were done. "They're aware I can eliminate them one or two at a time if they stray from their allies," he said. "They're operating in groups to counter this. They've given me no chances to hunt them down, and likely are not going to for the rest of this operation. We need to retreat. And you need your armor. Do you know what the hell is going on?" Ellie said to the side, keeping her eyes peeled down the corridor. The sounds of the slavers moving around hadn't faded yet. Instead they were growing louder. "No," he said, focusing on cutting the door apart. The few minutes I stalked behind them looking for targets, they seemed to be searching for someone specific. Whoever it was, they haven't found them yet. "Are they trying to assassinate you?" I asked. "Unlikely. They would have aimed for a day when I wasn't in armor. Considering there are 12, I strongly suspect they were anticipating me as a blocking problem, not as an objective." "Have you been out of armor since the Chosen came?" "No. Think they're after me." More possible, he said. All other targets in this dance hall have been unprotected in many other situations. If they were attempting to grab multiple targets, we would have seen them already capture a few. So far, they haven't shown any signs of chaining anyone. That they picked the same day you are armorless, in the same location, with enough knights to hold their own against me. They must have been waiting for a moment like this. If they were after me, someone must have leaked what I've come up with. There's no other reason to go after my house. Sure, Winterscar was on the rise, and I was getting known to have strong ties to the big players in this clan, but there were still far more politically powerful figures who didn't wear armor. Ultimately, the Winterscars were still only a regular retainer house. There'd be easier targets who didn't wear armor like a paranoid pipe weasel. So someone had leaked, and I wasn't sure how much. Were they after the occult secrets? Or something else? A massive blaring alarm suddenly kicked in, sounding all over. I recognized it as the clan red alert. The kind of call to arms during war or a potential catastrophe. Someone must have escaped the dance hall and warned others. Ellie said to the side. Shadowsong grunted, giving a particularly heavy cut through the door. Or, we might not have been the only target, and another operation taking place failed their containment. There were shouts coming from under us. Then two figures came into view on the other end, climbing up the last rung of the ladder. Slavers. The rank-and-file kind with rifles and no armor. They raised their weapons up, hands up. The one on the right screamed out. Deal with them. Shadowsong said to my side. Ellie got the idea faster than I did. She grabbed hold of Shadowsong's holstered pistol, taking cover behind his leg and lifting the weapon. I followed suit, trying to grab the Prime's rifle, only to flinch back for cover as the slavers opened fire. They targeted Ellie first, though the relic armor she hid behind was flaring out its shield, keeping her somewhat covered while Shadowsong continued to cut a path through the door. The pistol in her hands barked out a string of fire and forced the two slavers to take cover, stopping their own retaliation. I heard a grunt of pain from them. She might have hit something. More heavy boot footfalls echoed from under us, while the slaver pair continued to try to take pot shots at us. I heard bullets whiz by my face, lighting up the sides of the corridor with sparks, or otherwise getting chased away by the blue relic shields. Ellie continued to shoot back, blindly, but enough to stop the enemy from taking aim. That gave me a second chance to unhook Shadowsong's rifle from his back, and get it primed. With both of us returning fire, it evened the odds out greatly. Up until 4 slaver knights rushed by the pair of minions. Shadowsong grunted in annoyance, giving a quick glance and then turning his focus back on the door. Alert me if they get close, he ordered. One of the slaver knights flashed his headlights downrange, lighting us all. He pointed straight at me a moment later, the helmet keeping whatever he said private. Another knight instantly grabbed one of the minion's rifles, yanking it out of his hands before the man could fire another round of bullets at us. Body language from the newcomers made me think the slaver knight was yelling something at the soldier, shortly before he swung the captured rifle in rage, catching the soldier's head and twisting it far to the side with a bone-crunching crack. That one instantly slumped down, dead from the blunt force. The other soldier quickly dropped his own rifle, lifting his hands up, surrendering to his own allies. It did him no favors, since the 4 knights no longer paid any attention to the leftover rabble. Instead, they were pacing straight for us, keeping an easy grip on their rifles. I kept a hand on the trigger but knew the weapon here would be wasted. Relic armor was impervious to small caliber bullets. Shadowsong hadn't even turned around to see the events. He finished one last cut, took a step back and shoulder-checked the entire door, causing his newfound cut section to fly right off the slices, a few feet down the newly opened corridor. Go. Regroup with your guard and get your armor. I'll hold them off, and fall back when more of them arrive. Be quick, they're likely trying to cut you off as we speak. He said, turning around, drawing his knife in his spare hand while his long sword lifted in position. Ellie vaulted over to the cut section, hissing at me to run. I followed orders, making my own way through. "Oh, come on!" one of the enemy knights said, audible behind me. "There's 4 of us and more coming. Just give up. We're only here to bag the kid." "I refuse." Another knight scoffed. "You're the Shadow Song, right? I don't care how good of a duelist the brass thinks you are, you're only going to die here. You can't parry and dance your way out of a crowd. Just run, we're not going to chase you. Draw your blades." Shadow Song said. "You've lived like animals, I offer you the chance to die like men. Fucking clan fanatics. Don't know why I expected anything else. Kill him quick, boys, our target's getting away." I didn't hear much more, with our footsteps becoming loud enough to drown any noise behind us. The clash of a cold blade on blade followed behind us, bouncing off the tight walls with deep rings. Ellie stopped at the first intersection, a few seconds into our sprint. "Which side were your guards at?" she asked, looking left and right. "On the patio side. Should be down the left corridor somewhere," I said, keeping the rifle levied. "Good. Go that way, I'll go the other way." "What? Don't joke around, we've got to keep going," I told her, looking back. She shook her head. Then pointed behind her, at what I hadn't noticed. A trail of bloody bare footsteps, leading right to where she stood, where it was slowly pooling out by her left leg. "Got shot somewhere," she said, voice calm. "Where?" She shrugged. "Not the point. They can follow me. I'll slow down eventually too. I can feel my leg isn't doing what I want it to do anymore. Pretty soon the adrenaline will fade and I'll start feeling the hurt." I reached out a hand, which she slapped away with Shadow Zong's pistol. "Get running, you moron. I'll figure it out from here." "Ellie," I said, dumbly. "Don't be stupid, Keith. Please, for once in your life act like a god's damned Winterscar and cut your losses. There's no point playing hero here. You know that. The last time I had acted like a Winterscar, I'd caused an entire site to collapse on itself. I can't just let you bleed out in some corridor. I won't." "Great. So don't let that happen. Go fetch your armor and come back for me, all right? You need it since those twig arms of yours can't carry me for long." She hobbled closer, and then pushed me back with every bit she had in her. It was enough to make me stumble back a bit. "If they follow the trail of blood, and they will, what do you think is going to happen?" I hissed out. "They'll shoot you dead at best. Or just grab you and drag out into some slave ring. You think I'm just going to sit in the dark and give up? Don't think I'm not going to do my best to stay alive. I'll play dead, or hide somehow," she said, taking a few steps back into the darkness. "And in the grand scheme, I'm just a nobody if I bite the bullet. You're not. Out of all of us, you clawed your way up to being somebody, you're on a different path. Stick to it." She gave me a mock salute, using the pistol as a placeholder knife, flashing me a soft smile that burned its way into my memory. "Been fun, catch you in another life." Then, she turned and jogged down the other end, blood splattering with each footfall as I watched her fade into the dim darkness. I took a step forward to follow and something froze me in place. Sounds of fighting behind grew, a cold blades ringing louder. Something whispered into my head that I needed to go. My feet numbly turned around and began to sprint the other way. My mind ran through a gauntlet of excuses, before settling on what Ellie had tossed out. I needed to get my armor, a first aid kit, and then I could sprint right back and find her. If she didn't already find a spare kit somewhere. Ellie was a socialite, and didn't go out on expeditions much, but that didn't mean she didn't know the basics or how to take care of herself. I needed to trust that she'd keep herself alive until I could come back. I tried as hard as I could to scrub the feeling that this was the last time I'd see her. That platinum hair, swinging wildly as she raced away, bare feet on the ground, one outlined red and leaving a path behind. The blast doors up to now had all been opened, so the saboteur only sealed the minimum needed to contain the dance hall and nothing else. 3 more turns, and I found a ladder going down from the Logie fast track back onto the street. Here, what I found were bodies. Dead clan members, all shot. The whole place was caked with blood. A pair of slavers were kneeled down over a body, looting it. The rifle in my hand snapped up, and I took my shots. The first 3 round burst hit the one on the left, shoulder, chest, and head. The other one stood, twisting around, which made him a larger target for my next set of shots. He stumbled backwards, hitting the alley wall, sliding down. Body going into shock. I didn't pay him more attention, instead continued my sprint away. A part of me realized this was the first time I'd killed a person. 2 one after the other. And yet, I couldn't feel anything at all. Just a drive to keep going. I came out the other end of the alley, running into the remnants of a war. 2 slaver knights laid on the ground, blood pooling away from cleanly cut limbs. One of them was missing a head. The other was missing his arm and his torso had been bisected in half, viscera spilling out. Their armor was being stripped away plate piece by piece, by another group of figures, about 7 as I could count. 2 were donning the stolen plates as quickly as they could, while a third was dragging out power cells and scrap metal to help repair the cut portions. They all carried blades on their person. Dark, carbon fiber swords with a hint of silver outlining the edges. My blades. All of them wore deep black tunics with blood-red emblems. The sigil of House Winterscar. My soldiers. Captain Sagrius stepped out of the shadows to my right, his own carbon fiber blade raised in his hand, ready to strike down, pale occult blue lighting up his features. He held it up for only a moment before recognition flashed through his features. Rustles of fabric around me sounded, and I realized 2 other soldiers had been waiting in position at the entryway, now right behind me. They had knelt down on one knee, the sound of occult blades being switched off. The captain of my guards turned his own blade off and rushed forward, grabbing my hand, kneeling and pressing it to his forehead for a moment before standing back up. "Thank the gods you're safe, young master. We need to get you armored up and out of here." Book 2, Chapter 39, Escape. I whistled. My guards had done quite well while I've been away. 2 knights against just 10 soldiers. Some clans would pay a fortune for those odds. Color me impressed, Captain. The whole area was caked in blood pools, from different sources. Captain Sagrius came closer, taking my attention. "The blades you crafted made all the difference. No deaths on our side. Turn to fight, we'd have had no chance at winning into one where we crushed them. Not a perfect curb stomp, but certainly made all the difference to these men." I could see a few holding onto the carbon fiber blades with the kind of respect one would lavish their most prized possessions. It hadn't been earned easily, however. Slumped on the wall was one of my own, bandaging his torso with white gauze that was quickly being stained red. He flashed me a quick grin. "Only a graze, Master Keith. Dodged most of the hit. I'll be back in action in no time." I don't know if he was telling the truth or being brave. The bandage hid too much of the damage. I noticed some of the others had also applied bandages on their own arms and legs. Those seemed more like scratches, given that they were all still busy getting the armor peeled off the dead slavers. "How did you know to cut them off this direction?" I asked. "A gamble. We saw the knights storm into the dance hall before they caught sight of us," he said. "There were 12, all grouped up. Gut feeling told me they had come for you. I'm not sure how true that is, only thing that made sense to me. I saw no point in ordering my men to charge against 12 knights, instead I assumed you would find a way to get out and the enemy would be forced to split their team into groups to hunt you down." He gazed at the 2 dead slaver knights. Was right about that part, thank the gods. This pair was clearly rushing to cut someone off. Easy, distracted targets. One of the soldiers grinned at that. Bastards didn't consider us a threat, thought they could just ignore us and run through. Cost them dearly. The hilt guards you forged into these blades made all the difference. Neither of them had enough time to come up with a counter. They froze up, not knowing how to react to that. Red blood pooled from the dead armored bodies, slowly reaching his feet. He spat down into it. Slaver scum! Their armor will be put to better use for House Winterscar. And none better than in your hands, he said, pointing straight at me. We've all seen what you can do in armor. Zagreus nodded. Once you're armored up, Master Keith, you will be far more safe. The guard can switch focus to hunting down the scum. I realized their unworded agreement. They wanted to give me one of their newly earned armors. Likely believing I could fight the same way I had in Journey. Except, this armor wouldn't have any of my fractals or personal work on it. Plus, the shields would start out drained off the start, it would take at least 10 minutes before they started charging again. In addition to the repair times. I'd gain a good advantage in speed and endurance, but little else. It would be a good idea, but my skills come from tinkering with my armor. I engineered Journey to work with me specifically. I said. Appreciate the gesture, but those armors will be far more useful in your hands than in mine at this current point. The captain gave a salute, not asking questions. As you will, Master Keith. What are your orders? Grab the armors, break into a house nearby and finish repairs and gearing up in hiding. Once you're done, go down the way I came. Look around for a trail of bloody footprints, there's a woman who's an old friend of mine. We were forced to split up, try to see if you can help her until I can double back with my own armor. I gritted my teeth, but ultimately I knew I had to pick the right choice over the one I wanted. These soldiers were committed to following my lead, I had to be someone worth their loyalty. If it comes down to choosing between the life of your men and yourself or her, abort and protect yourselves first. I'll not demand you to lose your life over what's ultimately a selfish wish. Zagreus gave a curt nod. The men will do our best, Master Keith. If it is within our power, we'll see to her safety. Good. I said, feeling sick to my stomach as I turned to walk in the right direction. I need to make my way back home, are the comms working? The captain shook his head, following at my side. No, sir. All the Logi comms are all down. The clan is blind right now, we can't reach the estate grounds. However they must have struck the Logi casts first before they came to the dance hall. Or hit at the same time. Not great, but not unexpected either. I need to get to the vault and equip Journey one way or another. Once I get into that armor, we've got a much better chance. I turned my walk into a jog. The captain followed behind, motioning 2 uninjured others to come with him, while silently ordering the rest to remain behind and follow my orders. We'll escort you to the gates. The captain said. The rest of my men will catch up once they're done with the salvaged armors and finding your friend. The estate grounds were a 10-minute jog away, assuming I didn't run into anything. That's a long time to run when knights are giving chase behind. I wasn't sure if I should order Zagreus to stay put, but the presence of 3 occult blade wielders who were clearly better warriors than I was, it could make all the difference. It was about 7 minutes into the sprint that I realized how the slavers had gotten this far into the clan. We bolted past what we believed had been other clansmen, up until they stood and pointed rifles at us, shouting for us to stop moving in heavy other-sider accents. The captain didn't answer, instead drawing out his pistol in one fluid and practiced motion, shooting the man twice in the chest and once in the head, all in a blink of an eye. Then he dove to the side, yanking my tunic to force me into cover. The other 2 drew out their own rifles and began to open fire. From our cover, the captain and I wordlessly joined the firefight. The slavers had reacted correctly to the situation. Not these particular mooks, they shouldn't have even asked us to stop running or to put down our weapons. And they quickly died for it, too exposed and lacking the proper cover against us. But in general, the enemy had reacted as well as they could have. Instead of sending out their knights, they'd sent out their mooks to locate where we were. Once our location was known, only then would they send the knights to come after us. The last slaver was shot and killed a moment after his compatriot had bit the bullet, but that was largely enough time for the man to out us over their local comms. Sagrius grimly continued the sprint forward, but we all knew it was a matter of time until the knights caught up to us now. Nobody can outrun relic armor, even with our head start. A minute later, that was proved right as a pair of heavy footfalls started sounding behind us. Bullets started flying wildly over our shoulder, along with the unmistakable calls of a relic armor amplifying sound. "Stop running! Give us the kid and we'll let you live. Need to split," I told the captain at my side. "They're after me, they'll follow and leave you alive." "Can't do that, sir," the captain said, questioning me for the first time. We all took an oath. "And there's only 2 of them, with skill and coordination, my men, and I might hold them at bay." Putting aside that these were unarmored men suggesting that they could hold off relic knights, which was largely considered a suicide mission, there was a number problem to deal with. "There'll be more. I know some of the superstructure paths like the back of my hand. You'll only slow me down, Captain. You've got your skills, and I've got my own. Fall back, regroup with your men. You'll be able to do a lot more for the clan than dying here." I didn't wait for him to answer, instead tossing Shadowzong's rifle away. With the foes I'd be dealing with, I needed all the weight off of me and both hands free. Turning on my heels, I rushed at one of the Logi catwalks, clambering up like a weasel and mentally prepared myself for the dead sprint that would follow. I knew where the footholds were, everything was standardized so every catwalk had the same places to grab hold over and the same lengths to jump. In seconds, my body moved on muscle memory and I was already slipping into the cracks of the clan colony, rushing through the empty space used for ventilation. Running parallel to me, I could see the captain, shouting orders to his men in the same breath. He looked both flustered and upset, but was grimly following my orders at least and not chasing behind me. At the next possible fork, the Winterscar soldiers took a right and split up into the adjacent alley, leaving my sights. None too soon. 4 more knights turned from another alleyway, joining the 2 chasing ones. They easily reached my point of entry, trying to follow into the superstructure the same way I had. Their numbers clogged up the entry, but relic armors allowed them to ignore any mistake they made, and outright jump past footholds or handholds needed. And if the superstructure was thin enough, they could rip metal apart as if running through a paper screen. Soon they were all chasing behind, cheating with superhuman leaps to make up for their unfamiliarity. Gauntlets outright bending new handholds wherever needed. Stupid golden era magical bullshit really. I dove right back out from the superstructure, back into the alley, and down a thin pipe into the catwalk under the walkway. Through the grids, I could see one knight slam hard into the pipe and realize they were too bulky to make it through. Another grabbed him, shoving him aside and drew out his knife, cutting into the walkway itself to make a path down. Scrap shit. I was hoping they'd be slower to figure a new way in. I gritted my teeth, and forced my tired legs to run forward faster. Behind me, the sounds of occult blades cutting into metal suddenly stopped, replaced by shouting and a fight. I ventured a peek behind and saw the god's damned captain and his 2 soldiers ambushing the 6 knights. 3 common soldiers up against 6 relic knights. This was the sort of fight that was so hilariously lopsided even the knights didn't quite understand what was going on for a moment. This might be the first time in their lives they saw common warriors charge at them. The Winterscar guards weren't fighting to win, that was clear from their movements and coordination. At least the captain was smart on that part. Instead, they were aiming to delay the enemy, striking out and forcing them to react rather than continue the hunt after me. The knights weren't stupid either and recognized a delay when they saw it. Whoever was leading them quickly gave orders for 2 of their knights to stonewall the 3 Winterscar soldiers, while the other 4 continued the work uninterrupted. In moments, 4 heavy footfalls fell into the same level I was on, barreling down after me. I turned, diving through machinery and wiggling my way into the cracks, emerging into another catway, in which I began to clamber right back up onto the level above. The chasing knights barreled behind, letting their armors tear through the metal in the way. Leaping over obstacles, and using their knife to handle anything that blocked the path, cursing the whole while. It was a game of cat and mouse, where I had far more familiarity over where I was going and what was ahead of me. But they had raw power and my own frail body was quickly tiring out. Air was getting harder and harder to breathe in, as my exhausted body demanded more than was physically capable of drawing in. Almost managed to give them the slip twice, but those relic armors kept a bead on me somehow, pointing out where I could be hiding, and forcing me to make a break for it. The third time, however, it worked. They raced down a hallway, barreling right past while I had frozen above, watching them. The moment they were out of sight, I landed right back down and raced backwards, backtracking. Scrambling up another level, trying to keep out of sight. Their footfalls came right back around, and the chase was back on, except this time I'd bought even more space than I had started out with. I don't know how long this chase held, but every minute I was getting closer to the estate ground, and building more distance between the knights and myself. Not a huge amount, they could catch up to me in 10 seconds flat of a dead sprint on open land, but I made sure they never got that chance. With one last leap, I landed hard on a larger alleyway, rolling away my extra energy. Ahead were the Winterscar estate gates, the sentries already on high alert from the general alarm. They spotted me at once, and instantly waved for the gate to open. My legs almost collapsed on me, I held on, grunting and forcing them to lift me back up from my roll. Just a few more meters and I'd be safe. A few more meters. Behind, I could hear the noise of a few 100-pound armors jumping from strut to strut, closing in on me. With one last burst of energy, I made a dead sprint into the estate ground, yelling at the soldiers to follow behind and shut the door. Gods be thanked, they did exactly as ordered, sealing the entrance behind them, right after I'd come through. I fumbled and hit the ground hard. Soldiers were already gathered around the courtyard, a good 3 dozen of them. They'd heard the clan alarms and gotten prepared. Equipped with weapons and full gear. Unfortunately, none of that equipment could take on even a single knight, and there were 4 angry ones behind me. Ultimately, the Winterscar gates weren't going to hold them off for long. And neither was my small army. I needed to get into journey to have a chance. I took a few deep breaths, trying to get some more air into my screaming lungs, trying and failing to get back on my feet. A few pairs of strong hands lifted me right back up and blessedly held me upright. Master Keith? A sergeant asked to the side, the full question obvious to me in the tone of his voice. If the general clan alarms hadn't already spelled out a grim picture, me running into the estate like I'd been chased by a pack of machines likely did the trick. 4 enemy knights. Behind me. Armor. Get. Armor. I tried shouting, but it only came out as a wheeze. Don't fight them, can't win. Get to my workshop. Blades, 3 working. Find, use them. Only 3 extras blades I'd made since I'd distributed the current stock of 10 blades. And of that current stock, it was all in the hands of my personal guard, who were currently fighting off the slavers somewhere around the dance hall. I hadn't yet made it mass knowledge of the new blades, but the soldiers would hopefully figure it out quickly what I meant by blades. They'd find the ones that worked among the ones that were still a work in progress, they had to. Gods be damned. I spent too much time working on the scrap shit night breakers, and worse, I'd sent it all to the clan lord so that his men could practice with them. Should have secured my own house first instead. Did I really expect only run-of-the-mill unarmored mooks to attack my estate ground? Of course they'd hit with knights. If I were the enemy, I would hit the important targets with knights. How the hell they figured I was an important target was going to be a question I'll have to figure out another time. All out of my hands now. If I lived past today, I'd do better next time. Those 3 swords are the only chance you have against them until I can get my armor. My body finally had enough air to decide talking in full sentences was grudgingly acceptable. Get them first, don't engage. Delay only. The soldier nodded, instantly turning to his local comms and relaying out orders. Fortunately the rest were quick on the uptake, especially after hearing knights were coming. Before I was even done talking, the men were already anticipating what to do and a general rush hit the courtyard. The orders from my sergeant here came out only as a professional courtesy. Heavy bangs right behind me. The estate ground doors groaned, like a few heavy tons of angry metal had slammed into it. Somehow the door had won, refusing to break like some of the thinner parts of the clan's superstructure. Not even a second later, 4 relic blades stabbed through and began to cut into it like a can opener, clearly furious at the audacity the gate had. Break time's over. I took one last breath and began to sprint again, this time right into my estate ground and through the winding corridors. Behind me, there was a heavy clang of metal hitting ground and shouting followed by sporadic weapons fire. Heavy footfalls chased at my heels. The knights were inside the estate now, clearly ignoring the soldiers and going directly after me. I raced forward, no longer feeling my legs, my lungs fighting for every bit of air I could shove inside once more. Gods above, at least when I started the sprint through the clan structure I had full stamina. Now, I was running on empty. I had to get to the vault, worse, I had to shake them off my tail before. It took 2 minutes to armor up with a team helping. Which meant I had to cut their line of sight, and crawl somewhere they wouldn't find me. And then sneak into the vault while the soldiers tried to keep the knights distracted. But the footfalls were getting closer. Needed to break their line of sight and vanish at the same time. In desperation, I zigzagged down a familiar corridor, taking my chances with the enemy knights this close to me. One of the air vents here connected to a larger sprawling attic. I mustered up whatever energy was left inside my legs, and forced them to leap at the wall, hands reaching out for the ledge. I flopped into the wall, my numb hands somehow gripping on the lip edge, and I pulled myself up, scrabbling into the vent like a rat. No, you don't. A hand grabbed my ankle and yanked me back down. Utterly unyielding. Strong enough to move my entire body, ripping my hands off their hold. I'm not going to let you rat your way out again. Fucking enough. The voice said, the heavy other-sider accent harsh to the ear. That pull threw me right out, into the open and slammed me hard on my back. What little bits of air I had was chased out of me. I rolled around, trying to get back on my knee for a running start, only to find myself caught mid-roll and forced back onto my back. A heavy armored hand gripped my throat and pinned me down against the ground. The slaver knight loomed over me, helmet hiding all expression. Gods, you're one slippery pipe weasel. Like chasing a ghost running through the walls. My throat was pinned down on the ground, the relic gauntlet nowhere near as massive as the machine that had once held me down the same way, but just as unyielding. I had no armor, no weapons, no occult to call on, and no plan. And even if I had a weapon, what good could it do me against 4 relic knights in this position? Game's over now, kid. The slaver said, we caught you. Book 2, Chapter 40, Last Stand. So, how are we gonna drag the kid back? Can't exactly bring him outside without a suit. One of the slavers asked. Yeah, this is a fucking mess. Another said. Zion's shipment ain't even scheduled for another 2 weeks. And we're way off the map from the dance hall. What's our exit plan now, boss? Those undersiders should have been with us too, fat lot of good they're doing now, pissing with their dicks out in the freeze. Enough. We don't need a goddamned suit. The knight holding me down said. And this chance was once in a lifetime. It paid off, see? We've got the brat. So shut the fuck up and do as I tell you. Yagrel, go out and keep the courtyard clear. Make sure they don't entrench guns around the area before we leave. Clanners are insane enough to do anything if you look away for even a moment. One of the knights stood at that, nodding. Rest of us, we'll wait here till the team groups up and then we all punch a way down together. If we get split up, that's the one way these fucks can snatch victory from us. How did you scrapheads get into the colony in the first place? I asked, wheezing through what little of my throat was still capable of breathing. My lungs were on fire, and that gauntlet was stopping the much-needed air, but still, part of me hadn't given up. The knight on top stopped mid-brief and looked down on me. Well, wouldn't you like to know, hey? Too bad. Clan Lord is a deathless. I snarled back. You think you're going to get away? He'll chase you to the ends of the world. You're not getting out of this alive. I don't think your little pet Deathless is going to be moving around for a few months with the gear we've got to deal with him. By the time he's back, this miserable shithole will be a crater, and we'll all be long gone like the snow. He chuckled darkly at that. You won't be around either, come to think of it. So both of you are going to miss all the fun that's coming. Saw a lot of pretty faces at that dance, can't wait till I come back for round 2. I'll be R. He shushed me then, spare finger pressing down on my lips, the gauntlet metal cold to the touch. You're lucky the knights with knockout drugs aren't here yet, but keep pressing your luck and I'll find novel ways of shutting you up. Got that? He lifted his head next, turning to the others. Don't let this brat get into your head. The Deathless isn't going to be our problem, trust the other team to do their job. I know we're deep in enemy turf and this hasn't gone anywhere close to the outline, but so long as we stick to what we've got, we should pull through all right. Don't panic, do what I say and we'll be fine. There was a sound at the doorway entrance, and everyone snapped their heads to see who'd arrived. 3 figures stepped through the open doorway. 3 soldiers in the Winterscar deep black uniform. I'd seen these 3 before at the feast, or sometimes gathered around the training yard watching Kedra and I spar. Back then their faces seemed so jovial. Now, they were dead set, a quiet sort of intensity to each. Each of them held onto one of my new blades. They raised up the black blades in unison, taking stances, igniting the occult edges. The slaver holding me down laughed. This some kind of joke? You lot don't even have armor, and we outnumber you. The soldier at the center narrowed his eyes, then met my own. Master Keith, 3rd corridor down. We'll buy you time. The raider constricted his hand on my throat. Don't even think about it, kid. He growled, then turned to the other knights. Kill these fucks, I'll make sure the brat doesn't bounce in the meantime. Make it quick. The other 3 nodded, drawing their blades out, stepping forward to meet the common soldiers. The center Winterscar raised his blade in the traditional salute to the dead. For House Winterscar. He spoke in deadly calm. The slaver closest to them had the gall to return the salute, more a mockery. For pleasure. He said, chuckling all the while. That didn't matter to the Winterscar, he charged forward wordlessly, blade whistling through the air. The other 2 followed behind like his shadows, matching the movements perfectly. The slaver slammed my face back down on the ground, holding me down and forcing me to see nothing but the cold metal ground and synthetic carpet. I heard the sound of occult blades clashing, shouting, screams, and relic armor shields flaring up. What the fuck do you assholes think you're doing? The one holding me down shouted. Stop playing around and kill them already. More crashing blades, more yelling. Then the hand holding me down let go with a loud curse, and I heard the sound of blades clashing right above me. Something grabbed my collar, lifted me up and threw me back on my feet. I had enough time to turn around and see one of my soldiers spin past an executing blow, delivering a counterstrike of his own before another slaver impaled him from the back, knife going in and out. The Winterscar guard grunted, falling on his knee for a moment before standing back up and swinging wildly with his blade. His opponent took the blow on his shields, gauntlet snaking out and grabbing the man's wrist, blade and all. A sound of crunching bones, followed by a flurry of knife stabs into the soldier, all the while the slaver screamed in fury. After a few more stabs, he kicked the man hard into the wall, powered relic armor easily breaking through the ribcage. The dying soldier's eyes met my own for a half-second. "Go!" he mouthed out. My feet turned me on autopilot and I sprinted through the hallways, searching for the third corridor. The sounds of fighting were dying out behind me, the ringing of a occult blade striking another slowing down, the sound of a relic shield breaking, then, no other sounds. No, there was something. Heavy footfalls, many of them, right at my heels again. The third corridor came into view and I understood why I'd been told to flee this direction. At the end an entire crew of 5 Winterscar soldiers had set up an autocannon turret, the heavy caliber rounds already loaded in, the gunner at the front aiming straight down, hand on the trigger. The crew behind waved me to stick to the side of the wall. I did exactly as instructed, sprinting on the far end of the hallway. The crew continued to aim down sights for a moment longer. Everyone seemed to be holding their breath. A muzzle flash blinded me as they opened fire, while I was still halfway through the corridor. Shockwaves struck me from the side like a physical force as heavy caliber rounds sounded off, one after another, zipping a few inches to my right. The sound instantly deafened me, cutting out any noise of the chasing footfalls. Disoriented me. But still my feet pounded forward. In another few seconds I ran past the crew, which were busy keeping the cannon fed. But I knew those relic shields were only taking small percentages with each shell. This wasn't going to be enough. One of my soldiers grabbed my shoulder and yelled something. I couldn't hear anything of course except for a high-pitched whining. He seemed to realize instantly, and shifted to sign language. "Vault. Armor. Prepared. Run." I gave him confirmation, turned and continued my sprint, the high pitch covering any sense of what was happening behind me. Another checkpoint forward, I saw a second autocannon getting set up by another crew of 5. How they had managed to carry such heavy ordnance all the way here, I have no idea. But they done it. And behind them were the vault doors. Those were wide open, with another 10 servants already rushing around inside, moving dark metal plates of journey around, preparing. I was all but shoved into the vault, where the soldiers outside slammed the heavy thing on my face with barely any acknowledgement, locking me in while they remained outside. The servants moved with mechanical precision, 2 of them sealing the door shut from the inside, while the rest were already lifting the prepared armor pieces and snapping them into place on my body. There wasn't any time to put me into an under armor, they just shoved the plate pieces directly on my dress suit, tearing the fabric if they had to. Despite the panic, they didn't let it get to them. The high-pitched sound ringing in my ears slowly died away, replaced by muffled shouting and the booming of the cannons, along with rifle shots behind the door. Normally, at an average pace, it would take a team about 2 whole minutes to dress someone up in armor from start to finish. They had already gone past the halfway point, the armor already powering up and gratefully taking the stress off my body. My wind wasn't coming back to me, the armor was holding me up now, and just in time. Sounds of fighting suddenly died off behind the door. It was quiet for a moment, and then a massive rattling explosion sounded off behind the vault. It shook even our own room, though the vault held firm. The servants flinched, but didn't stop in their preparations. They must have already expected this to happen. An occult knife stabbed into the door, followed by another at the opposite end. They took wide sweeping movements, cleanly slicing through the vault. The servants didn't pay any attention to that. I knew they must have heard it, or seen the blades in the sides of their vision. They didn't speed up nor did they slow down. They remained laser-focused on their task, taking each step as quickly and accurately as they could. No mistakes. Click. 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 Each section of the armor was coming together, nearly there. A pair lifted the shoulder plates, locking them in place. Another was working on attaching the smaller leg parts, the more intricate pieces. As soon as they were done, they'd instantly weave away to the side, cycling around, letting the next person attach parts while they went to fetch the following one. The knives continued across the vault until they reached each other, then drew out. A heavy grinding sound came from the door as the cut section began to push inwards. Click! 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 The servants all took a step back as one, the last plate piece affixed and humming with power. They'd managed to assemble the whole armor in under 30 seconds. A ridiculous speed. My helmet was passed over to me as the final piece and I slammed it on. The familiar hiss of pressurization surrounded me, along with the expanding foam clinging to the sides of my face and body. Orange lines and markers loading into place, coming to life. The shields flared, journey testing all the subsystems were operational and fully prepared. I probed my occult sense around for what I knew I had left inside the armor. The soul fractal lit up like an old friend. I dove into it, far more practiced this time, fury and rage bubbling through the link, remaining present even deep inside the soul trance. The other fractals inscribed within the armor lit up in my sense, ready to be used if need be. Ready to burn and maim the intruders. Power flowed into my mind, the options I had expanding out. Occult senses flooded into me, but my attention was solely on the enemy I felt directly behind the vault door. Good work, I told the servants. Stay behind me, I'll take it from here. The servants backed off, giving me room, a few sitting down as their adrenaline crashed. Most of them seemed to fully snap back to their senses with their work done, like they had been in a trance and were waking up only now. A few muttered quiet prayers, one after the other, eyes closed. The others were looked at me like I was their last hope. They'd done their part. All of them, from soldier to servant. Everything they could, each in their own way. Many dying for it. Now, it was my turn. What's going on? Cathita asked in my ear. Never seen you this angry before, heart rate is off the charts. Some girl reject you at your dance. No, a few rabid animals need to be put down. Maybe there was something in my voice, maybe it was the situation, but Cathita went quiet. No banter this time. With one last heave, the whole vault door collapsed downwards and two slaver knights stepped inside, their armor red with fresh blood, the skull designs seemed almost gleeful. One stopped, looking me up and down in the armor. You fucking whacking it on the snow or something? Just fucking surrender already, princess. His partner grunted, his accent more clearly understood. God's damned pain in the ass you are. A royal brat fed off a silver spoon, you think being in armor is going to change anything? You have no idea. I hissed. My long sword lit up in my hands, ready for blood. A moment ago, you had a chance. Now, that chance is gone. One of the slavers took a step into the room, a cold knife spinning idly in his hand. Oh no, Lenred, hold me, I'm shaken in me boots. Guess I'll just have to call up the boss and warn him everything's lost. I took my own step forward and drew into stance slowly, long sword held perfectly still, tip pointed directly at the enemy. You won't live long enough. None of you will. Book 2, Chapter 41, The Night of House Winterscar. They hadn't been prepared. They hadn't understood. By the time they realized, one was already dying, head cut off while his body followed behind, slumping down. My blade had scythed through the air, faster than he could see, catching him right on his throat guard, ripping apart his weakened shield, and biting through armor and flesh all in one savage swing. A blur in the air, a trailing arc of occult blue, death following behind. The other took things far more seriously after that, lashing out at me with furious knife strikes all while screaming curses. But far too late to save his friend. I took a step away, parried a second swing with ease, and retaliated by kicking the exposed slaver right into the wall in a spinning kick. He crunched deep into the metal, sinking into it, breath knocked flat out of him with a frenzied gasp. My blade raced forward, straight at his helmet. Some instinct screamed inside his mind to duck, but the reflex was nowhere near fast enough to escape me. The Crusader blade struck, weakening the shields significantly as it shrieked against the occult edge. Still, he followed through on his training, shifting his head to the side, and lunging out with a stab. A desperate, fumbling thing, trying to prevent a follow-up attack from me by sheer aggression. All too easy for me to backhand the stab away, throwing off both his arm and aim, while my sword once more bit deep into his relic shields to finish the job. The shield flared, trying to hold off against it a second time, and broke a moment after in a flash of blinding light. The man fumbled back, and found he was still against a wall. There was nowhere to run. Realizing, he threw out two desperate attacks in panic, missing both. The second stab I twirled under and lunged out. My cape billowed behind me, like a great white sheet, tracing where I had been moments ago. The extended index of my other hand mirrored my strike in parallel, guiding my blade like a river guides the stream. A beautiful flowing motion I'd seen my sister perform time and time again. Kathida's longsword sank through the chest plate and heart with no resistance, impaling the slaver into the wall. How? He coughed out in a whisper, choking, head wobbling for a moment before dropping back down for good. The man's extended arm going limp over my shoulder, his occult knife falling to the ground from the slackening gauntlet. The long sword withdrew slowly, letting the body slump down and out of my way. These slavers really had no idea just who they'd fucked with. And I wasn't going to give them a second chance to fix their error. I turned around to the frightened servants that had huddled at the far end of the vault. To them, the fight must have started and ended in a few heartbeats, too fast to keep track of. One looked up at me, eyes wide. "We'll be fine," he said, voice trying hard to keep a tremor away. "Please, Master Keith, you have to save the others, please." I give him a curt nod, turned and sprinted through the ruined vaultway, into the center of a massive explosion. No identifiable body parts, only burnt carbon and gore. The blackened auto turret remained standing, but the barrel had been sliced cleanly in two. The soldiers must have known they'd likely not make it out alive, and they'd brought explosives with them to detonate. One last attempt to weaken the enemy. No time to think about that. Instead I continued my sprint, hunting down the other two intruders, wherever they were. There was bloodthirst in my eyes, and my veins pumped with rage. Building up with every step as my shocked mind slowly began to catch up with the events that happened. The amount of people who'd died trying to protect me. The first slaver I found was back in the room where the 3 Winterscar soldiers had made their last stand. I hadn't been fast enough to save any of the 3 doomed men who'd known they were trading their lives to give me just a chance. Their bodies were all cut and mangled, left with little respect. The slaver knight was sitting at the side of a wall, trying to stem the blood flow from a cleanly cut arm. Using piece of Winterscar uniform from a dead body to do it. By his side were all 3 occult Winterscar swords, gathered all up. He looked up, faceless helmet staring at me as if in disbelief. Then the man screamed out in panic, legs flailing around, trying to push himself away. Without relic shields, and one hand holding nothing but a bandage, he was dead where he sat and he knew it. My hand snapped out, grabbing the screaming man's head, crushing his shieldless helmet under my fingers. Journey's gauntlets digging heavy indents into the metal. The helmet collapsed under the pressure, breaking apart with a groan, massive seams exposing pink flesh under. Even in this state, the relic armor was still designed to break apart, to give the user the most amount of time possible. No matter. The fractal of heat flared to life in my palm. An inferno of fire engulfed everything before my hand, wrapping around his trapped features, the burning temperature sinking into the open seams in between his ruined helmet. The slaver's screams took a different pitch, body shaking wildly under me as the helmet began to glow a dim red under my assault. The shaking soon turned into little more than sporadic twitching. There was no mercy in me, not a single drop for any of these animals. The body fell limp as I let go of the charred head. The finger plates on my hand rapidly cooled from a dim molten glow back to their dark colors, the air still a haze above my palm and digits. 3 dead, 1 to go. Where's the last one? I hissed out. Out in the courtyard. Cathita said. Sounds of fighting. I nodded, reaching out for the spare swords, bundling them up in an arm, and continued my dead sprint. The courtyard was utter chaos. A few dozen soldiers were opening fire on a single laughing slaver knight at the center, whose armor didn't even trigger shields against the bullet spray. Is that the best you lot got? He shouted. I got friends coming for you sorry scrap shits and you can barely handle even one of me. He shifted a rifle of his own around, taking return shots at soldiers, forcing them into cover, laughing all the while like a lunatic. I strode into that courtyard, tossing the Winterscar blades to the soldiers nearest to me, while I continued my way to the offending slaver, long sword held at my side. He turned, not understanding why all the soldiers had started pointing behind him and cheering. His head tilted in confusion until he saw me walking towards him. He promptly tossed the rifle to the ground, drawing out his knife, laughing the whole while. Finally a real challenge. Love it when dinner comes to me. I'll try to be gentle with you boy, gotta bring your head back home alive. Can't guarantee it won't hurt. Might make you suffer a bit. Had. I guarantee I'll make you suffer. I snarled. I'll make sure of it. I lunged for him. One moment I had been a dozen feet away from the man, the next I was already at his throat. Dust, smoke, and whistling air flowed behind my mass as my blade struck against the slaver's shields in a heartbeat. 3 more fast strikes came from my blade, battering him from all sides, before reflexes finally caught up to him, and he properly swung back at me. I easily ducked under that, using the motion to reposition to the slaver's side, delivering a pair of strikes and following it with a roundhouse kick that launched him across the air. He went tumbling on the floor, skidding until he hit the opposite wall with a heavy dent. The slaver's shields went down far under 50%, according to Journey. The man scrambled away, trying to make space for himself while I was still a distance away. Behind him, a Winterscar soldier lunged out at his back, one of my newly forged occult blades lit up, the carbon edge flecked with blood. The slaver turned, intercepting the attack with his knife. He brought his blade back up to cleave the soldier down from neck to hip, only for his blade to be intercepted by mine as I flew across the ground, catching up to him. I struck hard enough even his relic armor couldn't hold onto the grip, the knife flying away and slicing deep into a wall before the occult edge turned off. The Winterscar soldier didn't pause for a beat, going right back on the attack, more of the slaver's shields dropping with each blade strike. 2 other Winterscars sprinted at his other sides, their own recovered weapons striking out in tandem. The slaver tried to fight back. Each time he tries to punch or kick, I was there to block it, slapping the hand away, leaving him for my soldiers to cut to pieces. The soldiers smelled the blood in the air, shifting their tactics, relying on me to be their shields while the 3 went on systematic offense. They ripped him apart with cuts, striking out while the enemy was helpless to fight back. I made no moves to end his life. I wanted this animal to die slowly, in panic, to the very people he thought had been worms just a moment ago. Rage, fury, revenge, and bloodlust, it wasn't a pretty sight. There was almost an unworded agreement between us Winterscars. We wanted vengeance and blood for those who'd given it all. The gods watch us, we would get our pound of flesh. Half a minute into the fight, I no longer needed to bother trying to protect anyone. They'd done enough damage that the slaver couldn't properly fight back anymore. Likely only his armor was moving the body now, too many tendons and muscles had been cut. Soon even the armor couldn't move itself anymore. The rest of the Winterscar soldiers slowly surrounded the dying knight in a circle, kicking him back into the fight anytime he stumbled too close in some misguided attempt to flee. It wasn't every day they saw a relic knight being torn to shreds by mortal men. A reminder that no matter how powerful someone is, they still bleed. I watched from the sidelines, arms folded across my chest as the enemy knight was brought low by my soldiers. He collapsed on his back when one of the legs had finally taken too much and snapped from the weight. Blood had filled his lungs up, choking whatever final words of mercy begged out. He reached an outstretched hand to one of the soldiers, as if asking her to spare his life. Or maybe deluding himself that his hand could possibly stop her. It didn't. She stabbed right through the palm, ripped half of it apart, and then cut again, this time through the arm with an audible snarl. The arm flew clear off. Another soldier stabbed the blade down through the relic helmet at the same time. The slaver twitched, a tremor passed through the body as the sword sank deeper into the broken helmet, and then everything was still. It was over. All the intruders had been killed. A massive cheer rose among the crowd, and held for a few strong seconds up until the more level-headed seniors brought everyone into order. Shouts and commands flooded the previous noise. Sergeants shuffled soldiers around, calling medics to take the wounded, cycling fresh faces into the ranks while forcefully retiring the ones that had been exhausted. A group of 4 soldiers were already circling around the dead slaver, stripping the armor off of him in chunks, tossing them into a hover sled that had appeared from seemingly nowhere. A lieutenant came up to me, giving a curt salute. "Master Keith, there's likely other relic knights on approach given the taunting this one did. We should prepare. I've ordered a full defense to set up and for the servants to hide. We've got reports of 3 spare relic armors being salvaged from dead slavers further inside the estate. This one will make a 4th. Expecting these to be operational again and under our command in 15 to 30 minutes. Orders. Have we heard anything from my personal guards, or Captain Sagrius?" He shook his head. "No sir. Nothing on comms yet. Clan communications have been scrambled. Whatever the raiders planned with their slaver allies, they hit multiple parts of the colony at the same time. Last I heard, there were other slaver knights storming through the city. Recommend waiting until we have their armors online before we set out to help stabilize the city. Any word from Shadow Song, or Lord Atius?" I asked, without much hope. He shook his head again. I debated the merits of going back out there by myself, to search for my missing guards and help bring them home. I didn't get to make that choice. A shout came out across the courtyard, and through the ruined Winterscar estate gates, 6 figures walked into the clearing, 2 carrying a large crate with them. That must be the reinforcements they'd called. Just a few shy minutes too late to save their overextended team. 3 dozen rifles snapped up into attention, aiming down sights at the incoming slaver knights. No one opened fire, they all knew to save ammunition for more vulnerable targets. "You stupid fucks," the knight taking point said, motioning for his men to set the crate down. "I don't know how you managed to kill 4 of my men, but I'm going to flay the rest of you alive for that." Could fucking hear it on the comms, had to mute the shit-stained screaming. Then he pointed a long sword at me. "And you, Winterscar princess. You just had to make it a mess. Could have just surrendered, avoided all this. Now I have to butcher everyone to get even." "Funny. The last 4 of your men said the same thing," I said. "They're dead now." "Oh well, I fucking see that. Didn't like them anyhow, more loot for the rest of us, so you did me a favor. Don't know how you did it, probably split them apart and stabbed them all in the back like a fucking coward. Now, the 6 of us here? We ain't dumb. There's no splitting us up. Just all 6 of us against the one of you." I shrugged, taking my stance with deliberate motion. "They also told me they outnumbered me. That I wouldn't win. Again, they're dead now." He patted the crate at his side, laughing. "Exactly why I took the time to fetch this baby here, before coming for the party. Part of the original plan, this bit. Didn't think we'd need to drag it all the way out here, but congratu-fucking-lations. You've gone and made us all mad. Now, I'm not taking any more half-assed chances dealing with you. Father had told me once that skill was enough to overcome 2 against 1. But 3 against 1 was almost universally a losing fight. Even he couldn't take on 3 knights and expect to win without some way to funnel the enemy. Hold them off maybe, but not win. And 4 would have killed any amount of skill the moment they surrounded their victim. I wasn't feeling too confident about my chances, even with the winter blossom technique. But I wasn't going to allow more of my new family to die here. I beat them, or they beat me and took me away, leaving everyone else alive. Either way it ends here. Sure, they could sputter about massacring the whole house, but we all knew they didn't have the time anymore for that. 3 occult blades snapped to life behind me. I turned my gaze behind and saw 3 of my soldiers taking their own stances at my side, matching my own. This isn't a battle you can survive. I told them. Fall back. I'll handle this alone. I'm not out of cards to play yet. Negative, sir. The one on my left said, refusing to elaborate. I'll see you in my misconduct hearing after this. The one on the right said. Happy to scrub toilets for a year if it means I get a chance to kill slavers. Talon smiles down on me today. This is serious. We've lost too many good people today. You've survived so far and I commend you all for the sheer bravery you've shown in the face of death. I couldn't have asked for better men and women at my side. But if you fight here, your luck is going to end. There's only 3 blades, nowhere near enough to turn the tides. Might be only 3 blades, but plenty more waiting for their turn after I'm done. He said, an odd smile on his face. I noticed then that the rest of the Winterscar soldiers hadn't fled. No, they were all huddling behind cover, waiting. The slaver leader pointed a sword at me. How cute. Clanners asking to get killed for Ma'anaru. A fucking god's damned classic. He mocked, shook his head and waved a lazy hand. Fine. You know what? I don't give a shit anymore. Kill them all, boys. Don't leave any of them alive except for him. The soldier at my right flashed me a salute to the dead. House Winterscar. He whispered. Then turned and dove forward, the other 2 following behind in sync, all screaming out Winterscar, up against 6 relic knights. No time to argue, I drew out my spare knife into my other hand in a reflexive flourish, and charged forward, easily leaping past the 3 and diving deep into the fight in a whirlwind of blades. It was a nightmare. My soldiers were clearly far more skilled and trained than the mercenary knights they fought. But the relic armors were giving advantages my soldiers couldn't overcome. Each Winterscar had no second chances. They had no shields. No armor that could support their wounds and let them continue after. And they were outnumbered. They fought through it all anyhow, at my side. With my blades in tandem, I dove deep into Father's fighting style, everything I could remember of it. My sword flashed around, far faster than any of the enemy knights, a near blur in the air. Methodically striking any unguarded plates until shields would break. They weren't able to overwhelm me. Anytime they tried to surround me, my soldiers would dive in with a ferocity unmatched, forcing a hole I could slip away through. Often at terrible costs. They hit the ground bleeding, one after the other. I protected them wherever I could, but ultimately I knew I was only buying them a few more seconds of life. Even after they were cut apart, legs or arms severed, they still fought. And if they couldn't, they turned and threw their occult blades out past into the courtyard, where another soldier would charge out, pick it up and join the battle. The rest of the Winterscars stalked the sides, opening fire with rifles, trying to land distracting shots on relic helmets anytime they had a clear vision. The courtyard was ablaze with sounds of occult blades zipping through the air and rifle shots pinging against armored knights. A few of the more bold soldiers dove empty-handed into the fight, dragging away wounded Winterscars back behind friendly lines. Medics swarmed their side, immediately cauterizing blade wounds and handling triage mere feet away from the slavers. One soldier had even brought out a fire extinguisher, funneling a massive torrent of white in an attempt to blind a knight. Didn't work. It took a lot to obscure vision from relic armor given the sheer spectrum of sight and scanning abilities they had. All through the battle, I fought at the center of the maelstrom, my sword and knife lashing out as fast as I could think. Relic shields started to break. Amor was cut into, following heads. I nailed one, slicing his hand, leaving him exposed and weaponless. I kicked him backwards, right against the house soldiers. Without means to fight back and already on his back, he didn't last long as they tore him apart. Another I slammed onto the ground with a casual twist of my arm, in front of a woman who'd just picked up a fallen Winterscar blade from the last wounded soldier. She didn't hesitate to drive that blade straight into the slaver's head, before dive rolling away from another slaver trying to decapitate her in turn. The slaver tactics changed in moments. They realized the extra 3 blades being passed around was giving me just enough leeway to fight them all off. And their window of being able to take me down was quickly being whittled away, one dead slaver at a time. The combined might of my house behind my back was pulling the odds in my favor. They stomped down on the blades, outright destroying one, and claiming the other 2 after suffering another dead knight to take it. Without the striking soldiers to distract and add mayhem into the fight, the remaining 3 knights pressed down on me, finally forcing me into a defensive retreat, using my own blades against me. I gave ground only when needed, but the fight was rapidly turning against my favor now. As fast as I was, I couldn't block 3 simultaneous knife strikes from 3 different directions and 2 additional longer-reaching swords. Father or my sister might have the intuition and outright genius to twist and dodge in just the right ways, but I wasn't them. My shields were dropping rapidly with each coordinated attack. Cannon fire lit up the clearing, massive rounds striking the slaver knight in front of me, forcing his shields to power on to block the hit, throwing him stumbling away mid-strike. He growled, pointing at the cannon. Another slaver peeled off and raced across to deal with it, while the Winterscar crew on the other end opened fire and held the line against the speeding tank. It gave me a window of opportunity. If I could rush one of the knights down, I could handle the other even without any shields left. I sprang forward and was instantly stopped. A massive metal net wrapped itself around me, the heavy chain balls on all ends slamming into the ground and denting the metal from the sheer weight. The whole thing bogged me down, putting an instant halt to my motions. It was a struggle just to turn and see where the net had come from. The slaver leader pulled a second net from the crate his men originally carried into the courtyard. He moved with quick motions, looking panicked. My occult blades began to rip the net apart, until a heavy set of hands closed down on my own, struggling to hold me still. It wasn't outright stopping me, but slowing down by ability to get free. More nets were thrown, each one further entangling around me, restricting my movements. Journey began to groan at the stress building up on the joints, now pressured by the weight of 3 metal nets and another relic armor trying to pin it down. Before I could swipe again, 2 more arms reached out and grabbed my rightmost hand, forcing my blade to come to a complete stop. The 3rd knight had returned. And now the 2 holding my arms. Both slowly prying my hands open, trying to disarm me. It was only a matter of time until they overwhelmed Journey's grip. The leader of the slavers strode forward, his own sword flashing. If I have to cut off your legs and arm to get you to stay fucking still, I fucking will. Swear on the gods. No. You know what? You don't deserve that offer. I'm going to toss you to that metal fuck as a cripple, and he's just going to have to deal with it. Cathita. I said under my breath, voice oddly still as the armor struggled to hold onto my weapons. Trying to stay upright as the 2 slavers and the net robbed me of any mobility. You got an idea there, honey? I hope you do. I don't think they want to shake hands and sing hymns to the goddess. Generate a combat engram of yourself and take over. Don't see why not. Journey has plenty of data for an accurate one. Don't think I'll be any better than you are though. You're kind of stuck, so I'll be just as stuck. I know what I have to do. Do it. The slaver got closer, blade flashing up in light. I could almost see that sadistic smile hiding behind the helmet he wore. Fine. Hope your plan works. Cathita said, HUD elements rearranging across my vision, showing additional subroutines triggered and loaded. Journey's original monotone returned, speaking words I'd heard a lifetime ago. Releasing safety locks. Loading predictive engram. I reached deep into myself, disconnecting my soul from the rest of my body and severing the winter blossom technique completely. As my hands went limp, another set of hands came to life, clenching tightly on the sword and knife that were being pried away. I could feel the armor move on its own, struggling against the net. It was a faraway feeling. The world became peaceful, my struggles ending. Further and further I receded from reality, until the soul fractal and the occult sight were the only thing left and I floated, suspended in the slow ebbing current of my own mind. My eyes opened in that darkness, searching for what I knew was there. What I had left behind, meticulously carved and studied in the safety of my sanctum. Somewhere, deep on the inside of my chest plate, a fractal lit to life at my touch. A cold blue began to spread across my armor, faint wisps floating up, shocks of pale lighting crackling across the plate. The slaver leader stopped in his tracks, one boot taking an uncertain step back. He whispered a curse, hand raising up to point at me. He's a deathless. A beat passed. And then Night dove forward in panic, blade in hand, racing to end me as quickly as he could. A dozen trained rifles all opened fire on him that very instant, the Winterscar soldiers desperate to stop his charge any way they could. A few had outright started to sprint empty-handed, no plan other than to somehow get in between me and that blade, even if they had to jump in front. None of them would reach us in time. The slaver ignored the weapon's fire, hundreds of yellow sparks dancing across all sides of his armor as the bullets pinged off. His knife unerringly dived down, straight for my heart. I focused my mind one last time. In that dim darkness, only I and the fractal remained. My focus clenched around it, commanding it to fully rouse awake. It responded to my thoughts, burning like a bonfire in my occult senses, and pulsed out. Reality seemed to freeze for a heartbeat. Then, it bent to my will. Book 2, Chapter 42, The Sorcerer Knight of House Winterscar. The slaver knight's blade raced for my heart. Death was a single second away. But Lord Atius had offered me knowledge. The powers of a deathless. Deep inside my chest, the fractal of mirrors flared out. A cold blue rippled around a translucent hand lifting forth from my seized arm. The mirror hand raced forward, executing one single perfect block. The arm had been a full imitation of Journey's gauntlets and armor, all in pale blue. It had soundlessly moved right through the net, immaterial to reality, directly on a path to intercept the slaver's lethal attack. Held firmly in that spectral hand had been an exact mirror of the occult blade my physical hand carried. The edge of that translucent blade shining a deeper color like the real version of the blade would. That was the only part of the manifestation that still seemed to affect reality. Everywhere that edge scythed through was cut, air, and metal net both. The slaver knight stumbled backwards in shock as the arm faded from existence, dissolving like powder swept away in water. A half-breath passed. The two slavers on my side held firmly on my arms, helmets slowly turning to stare in horror at me. They let go an instant later, as if I was burning to the touch. Trying to put as much distance between me and them as they could. More pulses of occult rippled out, and 3 more wraith arms sprang superimposed on my body as I rapidly threw my will into the fractal again and again and again. Everywhere the ghostly blades scythed through, the net fell apart into chunks. Like a hydra of old, each arm struck out as if independent. Each performing one single action, one single swing. It was enough. The metal crumpled around me, weight now snapping the chains apart as a blur of occult blue shredded through the mass. Cathita rose from the ruins of the metal net. The real knife and long sword struck out, slicing through the rest, further breaking apart the weakened chains. She leaped up, relic armor ripping loose from whatever chains were left. My body landed back on solid ground in a heavy crouch, free again. Cathita brought us back up, long sword and knife casually taking the familiar stance of an Imperial Crusader. "Nice trick, dearie," she whispered in my ear. "I'll admit your little hocus-pocus might have been worth spending time on." The slavers scuffled up together. I could see them shaking. Uncertain. She let them take their positions. Helmet tilted slightly, almost as if mocking them. "Now watch closely," Cathita said to me. "I have tricks of my own." I couldn't speak. Too much of me was disconnected from my body, too far removed. The slavers tried to rally. They gathered together, executing techniques for handling an outnumbered foe. Once more trying to surround and corner us. I could tell they were well practiced at this. The old Imperial Crusader didn't spare any of it a second thought. She sprinted right into the mouth of their formation head-on. In life, Cathita had been fast. I'd seen the video archive. Her single-minded dedication to the combat arts had allowed her to master moves to their limits. It made her deadly underground, capable of striking out with some honed techniques at speeds only masters could reach. In death, she had none of those limits. Every movement she made was at a master's level. All the commands coming directly from the armor itself. There was no limiting factor. Speed wasn't the only thing crashing into the slaver knights either. Cathita had only known the Imperial style of combat when she'd died in that cave. But she'd been watching over me. And she'd learned. With Journey recording the exact data, she only needed to see me perform a move once in order to replicate it. The mix-up of the regal Imperial technique and cutthroat surface style was something the slavers hadn't seen before. Telegraphed attacks instantly turned into a ruse, flowing right back into stream-like attacks, and then to heavy-handed swings. It jarred them, forcing them to fight in unnatural ways. Worse, I recognized moves only Kedra had delivered while sparring with me. Cathita hadn't just learned from me. She had learned from everyone I'd ever fought since her inception. Kedra, Iron Reach, even Shadow Song. Journey brought their styles to life, Cathita moving with far more grace than I ever could, back straight, sword strikes sent out with noble bearing as she wove the different techniques into a cohesive whole. A cult raging around the armor the whole while, ghostly manifestations striking out against anything that drew too close with far more primal and simple-minded strikes. There was no technique to my part, only wild swings. I didn't need to pay attention to what my body was doing, I stayed limp within the armor, too detached to feel anything. Instead, my focus was completely on the mirror fractal and the ability granted through it. No small feat by itself, I had to imagine and program each movement the images would take, one after another, as quick as I could think. When I'd seen Atius use the skill, he could send out entire phantoms, moving for whole seconds out in the world, striking out. At my skills, I could only make partial manifestations and only long enough for a single quick swing. Arms and the blades. Occasional parts of the torso. But I made it work. Any attack that the slavers launched from behind Cathita, I manifested a counter-defense. She, in turn, went on a single-minded attack. I followed behind her strikes with equal ferocity from all kinds of angles that couldn't have been physically possible. Her already quick slices had nearly doubled in lethality with my additions superimposed over. A rhythm of battle wordlessly clicked into place between us as we crippled the formation arrayed against us, like a hammer against nails. The armor focused fully on taking out one slaver at a time, putting all of her trust on me to hold off the other two. Neither of us spoke the plan to one another, we both understood, as if we were each one part of the whole. The fight turned hard against the slavers from the start. Another set of swings and the current target's shields flashed and broke. The man broke with it, turning all the while screaming incoherently, trying to sprint away. He got one step in, before he found himself staring at the end tip of a long sword skewed right through his chest and heart. His last sight of the world, before the sword was pulled free and the man collapsed onto the ground, dead. She brought herself back into stance from the lunge, slowly, almost like a predator playing with her prey, twisting the long sword around on her palm with casual apathy. The last two slavers held back for a moment, glancing to each other, as if contemplating their chances on running. Cathita didn't give them a chance, sprinting wordlessly at them. The armor began to methodically cut apart the next slaver. That one tried to hold back the flurry of attacks, failing to parry even a single blow against Cathita's technique. The last slaver had at least put up some kind of a fight, this one was clearly out of his depth. The shield was whittled away in instants as the two of us worked in tandem to rip him apart. Worse, he realized he'd been abandoned by his teammate halfway into the attack. The slaver leader had decided discretion was the better part of valor, turning and sprinting straight out through the Winterscar gates, leaving the last man as a speed bump to slow us down. We cut into that final night without much effort now that he was alone against us with broken morale. In between the armor's precise strikes, I wove out my own ghostly hits, from alternate directions like I'd seen Lord Atius do in his own fight. His shields finally came near the limit with an errant strike of Cathita's knife. A ghostly strike a half-second after completed the job, shattering the shield entirely and cutting deep into his bicep before fading from existence. The slaver never had the time to notice, as Cathita skewered him right through the helmet in a swift follow-up thrust. Quick and clean kill. The body twitched, crashing down onto the ground. Another armor for House Winterscar. Well, wasn't that exciting? Cathita said. Almost unfair to the poor savages. I rather enjoyed that. He died too quickly. I growled, slowly returning to my senses, my soul returning to the winter blossom configuration. The courtyard around us was silent. Winterscar soldiers had surrounded the perimeter at the start of the fight, all of them waiting for the next autocannon to arrive, or the next moment where their rifles could potentially distract the enemy. And then the fight had changed. Even the most battle-hardened of them had stopped to stare once the occult flooded into the world. I brought my sword up, swung it clear of blood and turned it off, back into the sheath. At some point the alarms across the clan had stopped, but I couldn't tell just when that had been. A beat passed in the now quiet courtyard. The soldier closest to me knelt down, knee hitting the floor with a quick thump as he bowed his head. The rest of the Winterscars followed in suit, some making signs of the divine with their hands, many outright praying. Like a wave had spread out. It felt a little surreal to me, turning around, seeing everyone kneeling to me of all people. I didn't know what to do in this situation. Every childhood fantasy I've ever had about being respected wasn't even fantastical enough to have people kneeling before me. Considering what they've witnessed, I probably looked more like some mythical hero out of a fairy tale to them, and this was the origin story they found themselves in. Footsteps outside the gate saved me from having to say anything or make some kind of speech. In the hushed courtyard, those footsteps were louder than bullets. That seemed to break whatever spell had been cast on the Winterscars around me. They all leaped back up into a frenzy of activity at the shout of one of the sergeants. A dozen were sent out right away to recover the dead slavers and strip them of armor. Others were bringing the patched-up wounded back into the safety of the estate, right to the hospital wing where they could be tended to. Soldiers came to my side, setting up defenses, while others were trying to seal the gates shut once more with whatever scrap and welders they had on hand. I noticed they kept a short distance from me, as if not daring to get as close to me as they'd normally have done before. A figure walked to the edge of the ruined gate, and I threw away my racing thoughts to focus. The man's armored gauntlet clamped tightly on the helmet of a dead knight, dragging the whole bloody body behind. The body being dragged was unmistakably a slaver knight. Both his arms had been cut cleanly off, and so had the legs. The one dragging the body was none other than Shadow Song. He continued walking into the clearing, casually pointing a sword at one of my soldiers. "You," he spoke. "Bring cauterizing iron here. Now. We brought wounded that need to be tended to." Two slaver knights stepped behind Shadowsong on both sides, but there wasn't any kind of fight brewing. These knights had makeshift Winterscar tabards draped across their chest plates, and both were carrying wounded soldiers in each hand. On the side of their belts were the carbon fiber blades I'd designed. This had to be my personal guard, returning from the dance hall. In moments a whole team of medics descended on the two stolen armors, plucking the wounded soldiers out and getting to work on them. Shadowsong tossed the dead slaver's body to my feet, armor and all. Yours by right. Your soldiers slew this one on their own. Behind, a small troop of Shadowsong guards and the rest of my personal guard walked in next, including Captain Sagrius. He looked haggard, with a white gauze bandage tightly wrapped around his left arm, but otherwise seemed to have made it in one piece. Great luck on his part, considering the last I'd seen of him. He and two others took on an entire army of 6 relic knights. An outright death sentence in all but name. I see I had nothing to worry for. Shadowsong noted as he strode in, helmet shifting around, taking tally of the dead slavers and cut nets. It seems once again someone has underestimated you and paid the price for it. You will have to tell me how you pulled off the feat of going 5 against 1, and winning. No doubt some very clever tricks and tactics. 6, not 5. The last one escaped a moment ago. And it wasn't easy, I had to burn up a few secrets to survive. I told him honestly, taking my helmet off to get some fresh air. Secrets? Shadowsong turned to one of the Winterscar soldiers, who glanced up. The unworded question was clear, and the soldier answered it promptly. Lord Keith fought them all off with blade and some support from the rest of us. He said quickly, almost rambling. Was a display of sword skills I hadn't seen in all my life, honored Shadowsong, only Lady Kedra could have matched it. I swear on all the gods above and under, he moved like the wind itself, as if the 3 had blessed him their champion. The other soldiers nodded, each adding to the story almost unprompted. And more oddly, with no mention of the occult I had manifested. All of them banding together, making a convincing communal story on the spot. Trying to keep my abilities secret. I glanced back up to the Prime, looking bemused. Shadowsong listened patiently for a moment, humming. Then he raised a hand up, silencing the courtyard chatter. Lord Keith. Book 2, Chapter 43, Damage Control. The soldiers all glanced at me then, guilty looks in their eyes. Caught. Not what we need to talk about right now. I said, avoiding the topic, sheathing my sword and taking a step out of the estate grounds. Captain Sagrius, the woman? Is she all right? I didn't see her among the men. Neither carried, nor walking around. My gut lurched as I realized what Sagrius was going to tell me. Sir, we attempted to search for her but were intercepted by slaver knights attempting to follow behind your trail. We fought them off until the Shadowsong Prime arrived on scene and finished them off. He ordered us to follow lockstep behind, over my protests. I turned to look at Shadowsong, who met my gaze without looking away. You were more important. He simply said, booking no argument. Sagrius, can you handle the rest of the fallout here? Do a full search of the estate for anyone that might have survived the attack. I said, already stalking forward. He gave me a quick salute. It will be done, Master Keith. Shadowsong stepped in my path, one arm reaching out to block my way. Is this wise? He asked. I made a promise. That is not what I asked. I'm in armor. And you're here with me, along with my guards. It'll take a feather to take us down at this point. Don't deny me this, accusory. I've seen too many people die today. Maybe using his full name got his attention here on how important this was to me. He tilted his head to view the courtyard, the damages caused, and then nodded. I found the corridor I'd left. Journey's headlights lit the way in, breaking the spell of darkness. Orange HUD lines revealed multiple different spectrums of light ahead, analyzing everything. We'd run into only small pockets of resistance now. Slavers who hadn't gotten the message to retreat. Defeating the 10 slaver knights that had assaulted House Winterscar broke the enemy back. This is where you separated? Shadowsong asked. I gave him a nod as we all continued. What happened to you after we ran? I asked. Their reinforcements never arrived. In the corridor confines, they were unable to surround me. I slaughtered the animals, and I did not allow them to run. Shadowsong said. As your captain explained, the expected reinforcement were handled by your men. I should have had you remain at my side in hindsight. We couldn't have known. I said. Doesn't matter now. How many knights did they attack the dance hall with in total? 3 I killed, 3 were killed by your men, and another 9 are dead in your estate grounds. And 1 escapee lurking somewhere in the clan. 15 knights in total. Have we found out how they snuck into the colony? Wolves pretending to be men. Shadowsong said. They carried their armor in crates, as if carrying spare scrap. Dressed as clan members from different castes. Once they came near their targets, they suited up in the shadows and attacked. I know of 3 simultaneous strikes so far. 1 on the Logi Center operations, 1 on Lord Atias's estate, and the last here at the dance hall. Scrap shit, they really tried to take on Atias? I thought they were bluffing. So I have heard. Shadowsong said. They wouldn't have done so without being prepared for it. I fear that they have successfully stalled him somehow. Red came into the headlights, outlined in orange lines as Journey pointed out the pattern. It had rusted into a brown color, but I recognized the footprints. Ellie. I doubled my speed, following the tracks as they continued down the hallway. They remained straight and focused, up until a larger pool of blood and nothing else. Boxes and crates were scattered around, but nothing else. Ellie must have bandaged her wounds somehow. Or found a makeshift boot of some kind. Crates and supplies here have been disturbed. Shadowsong said. Moved from their original spots at the side of the corridor. A leftover hover sled she found? Took the supplies off of it, and then used it to escape. Unlikely. There is dust on some of these boxes, and outlines on the ground where they'd been moved from. A weak voice spoke, directly above me. Keith. Instantly, my headlights flashed straight up to the source. There, I found Ellie. Pale, wedged into a crook in the ceiling. Her leg had been bandaged up by a torn part of her dress. Soaked red. Relief flooded through me, an odd sensation to experience given the fugue-like distance the winter blossom technique granted. If I hadn't been controlling my movements with my mind, I might have collapsed on my knees just now. Why had I been worried in the first place? Ellie was a survivor. Of course she'd come up with a plan to evade the slavers. It didn't take long to get her brought down, the Winterscar guards already surrounding her, taking out their medkits and undoing her makeshift bandage, peeling away the slowly coagulating blood. She's been shot 4 times in the leg. I said, Journey having done a quick scan of her head to toe. The armor superimposed the position of the lodged bullets. Pincers. I called out. They were in my hands before I had even turned my head. The soldiers were taking out the next set of tools and items needed for bullet wounds with practiced efficiency. They knew the basic drills since childhood, every retainer did. One of them injected Ellie with a painkiller. She grimaced. Funny. She said, words slurring slightly. Never once thought I'd be the one on the other end of it, picking the safe route instead. That stuff works fast. I extracted the first bullet, tossing it on the ground and leaving the wound alone. You always were good at finding ways to avoid expeditions. Never understood that myself, expeditions were where the best loot could be brought back. You missed out. Another Winterscar was already wiping the area and dressing the wound as I worked on the second bullet. Journey showed me a full heads-up display. Ellie was technically dying of blood loss according to the armor, but it was preventable. especially with Journey showing me every step needed to do the job well. No countdowns this time. No unhealable wound. Never liked fighting. Ellie shrugged. Or scavenging. Or gore. I know a lot of others would have killed to have a chance at recovering salvage for profit, but I always figured there were more efficient ways to make money that didn't involve a high chance of ending up in a crevice or under a tombstone. You're dying of blood loss, and you're still thinking about money. I deadpanned, withdrawing the next bullet. Oh please, stop being so dramatic. She slapped the side of my gauntlet, chiding. You would be panicking a lot more if that armor of yours wasn't sure it could save me. And then I'd be more worried. You're a terrible liar. In my defense, a lot of angry people think I'm an excellent one. I hummed, wrapping up the third bullet and moving on to the last. Shadow Song scoffed behind me, as if personally insulted. But he remained silent otherwise, keeping a watchful eye down the corridors. The last bullet was extracted, and I let the soldiers handle the rest, picking her up once it was all said and done. She would be safer if dropped into a house nearby. Shadow Song motioned with a hand. The slavers are not here for valuables. Keeping her on hand will expose her to danger. No, I'm taking her back. There was a static hiss on the comms, and then chatter erupted. Clan communications restored. Cathita said over the din. Nice of them to finally get that done. I don't know about you, dearie, but I'm quite curious to see what's going on around the area. The clan was in shambles, but mostly unscathed except for a few surgical positions that had been attacked and destroyed. A raider strike force had raced across the White Wastes in the middle of the operation, attacking the outer defenses and breaking turrets and railguns while the comms systems were down. They'd been repelled, but not without the defenses suffering damages. A highly coordinated attack. My guards and I surveyed the dance hall, searching for any signs of fighting. Once the knights had left trying to hunt after me, the slaver foot soldiers had been without support and disorganized, deep into enemy territory. They'd been shot down the moment people began to smell weakness in the air. Maybe a bit before that point. But once it was spotted that the slaver knights were no longer loitering around, things took a sour turn for the rank and file. What we found was mostly dead slavers being dragged into a pile. A few had tried to break rank and vanish among the clan superstructure, but the shinobi were now prowling around. It was a matter of time until they were hunted down and exterminated. Shinobi were the shiv in the darkness, the knife even clan lords used. Damage reports were coming in. 5 knights had attacked the Logi castes at different sections. An estimated 100 mercenaries on foot with variable gear. More information was coming in. Other places of interest that were held by slaver knight strikes. What they hadn't anticipated were the Winter Blossom-wielding clan knights. Once the surprise element had passed and the clan rallied, the slavers were on borrowed time up until one of our knights walked into the same room. The only knight reported to have escaped was the slaver leader, who'd cut rank and ran early compared to the others across the colony. Those had only realized the writing on the snow too late, when they'd already gotten surrounded. Explosives packed within their armors ignited whenever any were taken alive. Often to their own surprise, as a few had agreed to surrender after seeing their friends eliminated. It seemed whoever had planned the attack made sure no one could be taken alive to reveal any secrets. Casualties on the colony side ranked into the hundreds, mostly civilians caught in crossfires. Or brave souls that tried to get in the way despite lacking the training and combat abilities to make much of a difference. On the other hand, the clan was now 22 armors richer. The most massive haul in our history. And most of that armor went to either House Shadow Song, or House Winterscar. It was a haul that was surely going to make things messy in the future. What was left was cleanup. Logi comms directed anyone with firepower, re-establishing kill zones and taking command again of the situation. A small army of knights were directed to verify what the Chosen were up to as the first order of business, only to find the people there none the wiser at what was going on. They'd been too far deep to hear anything or be caught in any crossfires. Still, a barricade was set up and all of them had been rounded and held under watch. I left Ellie behind with one of my guards, giving him orders to take her back to my estate grounds while I reluctantly followed my duty and assisted with the roundup. Shadowsong and I were sent to the thicker sections of fighting, but no knights were left to fight us. It was clean up against enemy combatants who had no weapons capable of dealing damage to either of us. Only one had brought an occult knife with him, and that hardly changed his fate. Soon it turned into a hunt for rats hiding away. Took hours, and the Logi were still not satisfied that all the rats had been exterminated. Halfway through the operations, a shinobi dropped from above, right before my guards and Shadowsong. Synthetic feathers gave his shoulders a white appearance, the long robe's colors blending in well with the metal background, with exception to a wide reed hat, that did no favors with the beige color. Behind the white demon mask he wore, it was up to anyone's guess who he was. Shinobi were typically the clan lord's personal guard and operatives, though there were plenty who joined ranks with other houses depending on their situation. It was rumored they could sneak everywhere in the clan, and were the greatest spies on the surface. Which meant that the real shinobi were usually out in the open, dressed like normal civilians and just living their life. Considering this one was suited up in the full regalia ill-suited for combat, he was here as a messenger of sorts. Or he was pretending to be a shinobi. What wasn't a question was the signet he carried. The sign of the clan lord, authentic as journey confirmed. Shadowsong withdrew his blade, back into the scabbard. He'd nearly decapitated the man during the drop, halting only at the last second. The shinobi made no motion of having noticed. This one greets the honored house masters. I have come with a message and an order. Lord Atius instructed me prior, that should anything happen to him, I was to report the events directly to you, Shadowsong Prime. Shadowsong turned his head. Has something happened to the clan lord? Yes. We have lost contact with him and he has not been found anywhere as of yet. His quarters have seen an explosion, and his armor was found with a blade struck through it. We suspect assassins have made an attempt on his life at the start of the chaos, given the evidence of a fight we found left behind. This is the message I was sent to deliver. If he's been killed, we can ask him in an hour once he returns. Shadowsong said, clearly unimpressed. The shinobi shook his head. The situation is different. I'll be the judge of that. What was the order? The man turned that demon mask, looking at me. I could see dark brown eyes hidden deep inside. In events of this kind of situation, instructions left were to bring Keith Winterscar to investigate. He is going nowhere without me to accompany. Shadowsong growled. I cannot be completely sure of your identity. You may have stolen the signet you hold. The man shrugged, feathers rustling as he did. I was not ordered to return with the Winterscar alone. Only that he is to be brought back. You and his guards may follow behind should you wish. Lord Atius slept near the center of the clan, in his own estate grounds. His room however was unrecognizable. Not because he lived differently than men, but because it had been the center of an explosion. The Winterscar guards remained at attention, eyeing Atius's shinobi guards. Those were all across the grounds, appearing and disappearing. There was an overturned desk, nearly broken into small splinters. Ash was everywhere, likely from carbonized papers. The bed was equally unrecognizable. Screen panels had been ripped off their moorings, leaving broken glass over the blackened floor. What caught the most attention was a relic armor, impaled on the wall. One large sword remained embedded deep within, a silver sword that I didn't recognize. The armor had no helmet, instead it had fallen to the floor. I could tell this was Lord Atius's armor, because it carried on the shoulder that traditional great fur cloak, and the armor was empty. Deathless breakdown after death. The shinobi escort said at my side as I looked at the armor. Their bodies vanish into dust after an hour, leaving everything behind. There were 2 other relic armors in the room. These ones were not empty. They each contained dead bodies and were more clearly decorated as slavers from what was left unscorched. The first had his head cut off. The second had a clean cut through the chest, which had been torn further open by the explosion. No other sign of damage otherwise. 2 relic knights should never have been able to kill the Lord. Shadowsong said at my side. This is unnatural. They could have caught him by surprise. I said. Landed a few crippling hits at the start. It could be done. If they caught him sleeping. The shinobi motioned to the dead slaver knights. We suspect there were more than these 2. The attack could have been successful, but the explosion took them by surprise. The broken gauntlet in the Lord's armor makes us suspect he detonated a grenade in his hand. Given the noise, they were forced to leave without cleaning the site before the rest of the guards and knights could cut them off. What makes you think that? I asked. Our Lord's sword is missing. And one of the dead bodies clearly shows he'd used a blade to fight them off. We think the assassins took the sword but had no time to do more. I do not see the urgency of all this. Shadowsong said. We need only to wait for the Lord to return to life. He will be back within the hour. The explosion happened 3 hours ago by our records. The shinobi said. There is still no sign of Lord Atius, neither within the clan nor outside. We believe these circumstances are more unique. Explain. The shinobi didn't answer, instead he turned to me, and pointed a hand to the impaling sword on the clan lord's armor. I got the message and made my way, hand reaching out to the hilt of that occult blade. The moment I touched it, I knew what this blade was. More importantly, I knew what it could do. A moment before the explosion, the servants nearby claimed they felt something. The shinobi continued, speaking to Shadowsong. A rip in reality, as they explained. Each described it the same way, and none would have had time to work together to come up with such a story. It may seem far-fetched, but my team could not put aside the possibility of this being true. Not where a deathless is involved. The enemy may have come with a weapon tailored for the situation. Sorcery of some kind? Shadowsong asked. Explain it in more detail, shinobi. Remember when the Lord fought against that feather, underground? I asked, cutting into their chat. He turned his helmet to me. I think he realized what I meant almost immediately. You believe this blade has the same power? I don't believe anything, I know it does. Lord Atius's sword felt like it had only a few charges left, this one feels like it has been freshly forged. Do you know what happened to our Lord? The shinobi asked quietly at my side. He was doing a great job at suppressing any emotion at least. He's not dead. I said, to which the room seemed to visibly relax. As if I had punctured the tension and allowed the air to leak away. Except? Shadowsong asked. Except that he won't return for some time. The blade delays that. Days? The shinobi asked at my side. I shook my head. No. The clan lord told me that when this blade's ability is used on an immortal, their resurrection could be delayed by months, maybe a year even. At least against a feather it worked like this. If the slavers used it here, they probably banked on this effect. So that's their counter to a deathless in charge. They can't defeat Lord Atius, they want him out of the way for the invasion. Shadowsong summed up. The guards around seemed to flinch at the statement, as did the shinobi loitering in the same room. The shinobi to my side turned to Shadowsong and gave a bow. As First Blade, it is your duty to deliver the news to the council and see to the transition of power while they deliberate a new clan lord to take on the mantle, until our Lord Atius returns for it. Shadowsong nodded, accepting the role without comment. He reached for the sword impaled into Lord Atius's armor, turning it on to slip it out more easily. Then, he offered me the hilt. You know what I want you to do with this weapon, Keith. See that it is done. I took on the hilt of this strange blade. Pure silver white, with a purple hexagonal gem at the base of the blade, right before the hilt. Ornate, almost with vines stretched over it all. The inscription was legible, written in our words this time. No Latin. Weep, for I have come. And despair, for I will spare none. What happens now? I asked. Now. Shadowsong turned to look at me. Now, we tend to our wounds. We rid the clan of these animals, then we prepare to step outside again, for burial and mourning. What comes after? He took a breath, almost audible in the silent room. Lord Atius will not be here to guide us against the raiders, not in the time we have. He glanced around the room, taking attention of everyone. There will be no hiding the assassination. Panic will take hold in the clan. That is unavoidable. They will need heroes to look up to in these dark times. Faith that even in his absence, they will be safe. That duty falls to us. Each of us will need to prove that we can face what comes next, alone, and without fail. There is no other choice. We have no other choice. We cannot fail our people. The clan must survive.